Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill, it's worse than nil. So draw to the right conclusion, let them be still.
Welcome to episode number 82 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with antinatalists and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds. Now running 5 years strong. I'm your host, Amanda Sukenick, and today I'm speaking with the translator of the New English translation of what has long been considered the holy grail of antinatalist literature, Peter Wessel Zapffe's 1941 doctoral dissertation,
Det Tragiske,
or as it's known in English, On the Tragic. Ryan L. Showler. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast in person for the first time ever. Ryan, welcome to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. It's an honor to have you on the show today in this, the first and hopefully not the last in-person episode of the show. Very, very excited. Ryan, you have done seemingly the impossible. You have done what many, as I understand it, have set out to do before you and failed, which is to translate Peter Wessel Zapffe's 1941 doctoral dissertation, what many in the antinatal sphere consider to be the holy grail of pre-Benatarian antinatalist works on the tragic, also known in its original Norwegian language as, would you mind saying it again?
Det Tragiske.
So let me start out today by saying, on behalf of the entire antinatalist community and the droves of extremely appreciative Zapffe fanboys, thank you, Ryan. Truly, you have put a very happy smile on a lot of otherwise very dour, pessimistic faces. And I think that's true, isn't it? Everybody, please say their thanks in the comments. So truly, we have so much to speak about today. But first off, I would really love to know a little bit about yourself. So as long as it's all right with you, I'd love to ask you simply just who is Ryan Showler?
Well, first, Amanda, I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's a great opportunity to talk about the translation. Great opportunity to get the word out that the translation is in existence and will be available very soon. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So who is Ryan Showler? Well, so for the past 22 years, I've been a philosophy professor.
Okay.
And I grew up in Southern California and started my college and university studies quite late, about 9 years after high school.
Okay.
Several failed life attempts before that, and it actually was an advantage to wait some time.
Yeah.
Then, I started my education at community college in Orange County, California, and then started studying philosophy at University of California, Irvine. I got my bachelor's degree there, and then I came to Northern Illinois in 2001, did a master's degree at Northern Illinois University. And at UC Irvine and Northern Illinois, I was focused primarily on early modern philosophy and philosophy of science, sort of analytical tradition and history of philosophy. But then I went on and pursued a PhD at Loyola University, Chicago.
Oh, amazing.
And was there for 5 years and sort of switched my focus to Immanuel Kant. And I did my dissertation on Kant's practical philosophy and got a job teaching pretty quickly after that, or actually in the middle of it, at community colleges. My entire teaching career has been at community colleges, which sometimes they get knocked, but there are advantages to community colleges.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you go to a prestigious university because there are prestigious professors there, and then you get there, you never see those prestigious professors.
Yeah.
Or you see them in a auditorium of 2,500 people
Right.
and never really get to know them. And community colleges have advantage of small class sizes and easy access to professors and so on. So I've taught for 22 years in community colleges in Northern Illinois and Arizona and in the Detroit Metro. I've been, the last 12 years, I've been at Henry Ford College in Dearborn, Michigan.
Excellent.
And just recently left my full-time position there, and I'm sort of in semi-retirement, although I still do a little bit of part-time teaching in philosophy. And so that's who I am. I live in Chicago. My partner lives in West Michigan, is an environmental studies professor at a university there.
Awesome.
She's been there for a little while. And then I have some property in central Michigan where I go down, central Illinois, sorry, where I go down and do fun building projects. And
Lovely.
yeah, so that's who I am.
Excellent. Thank you for all those details. That's amazing. So can you tell me a little bit about your history as a translator? How did you, with all of those activities, how did you manage to fit in also becoming a translator? And how did you come to have such facility with Norwegian? Are English and Norwegian the only two languages that you speak and or translate? And what other works have you done besides this one?
I'd say my interest in languages started when I was at university. As an undergrad studying philosophy, you're sort of expected to study some language connected to whatever philosophical period you're focused on. So early on, I was studying German and French mostly.
Yeah.
And then at UC Irvine, I did quite a bit of German study. And so that German was really my first language that I focused on.
Oh, wow.
And while I was working on my dissertation, my dissertation, the topic of it is actually connected to translation, because there's a sort of a standard criticism of Kant's moral theory that you hear quite a bit. And I argued that it's a bit of a pseudo problem because translators of Kant failed to recognize a distinction in the original German that is there. So that's kind of when I really started to see translation as a bit of a archaeological effort to sort of mine down and find hidden distinctions that are sometimes missing in translation. And then, for many years, I translated untranslated philosophical works and literary works for my own purpose. So yeah, that's how that became. So I can do all right in German, speaking, reading, writing. French, I'm a little better because I got really interested in French later and spent time in France, practicing. And what might shock you and some listeners, viewers, is that I don't actually speak Norwegian.
Yeah.
My ability to read Norwegian comes from, first of all, from a bit of confidence in reading German, and most of my ability to read Norwegian comes from translating Zapffe. When I started,
wow,
my ability to read Norwegian and Danish, which are very similar, was weak at best, and it was a very slow process in the beginning.
Yeah,
there's enough commonality between German and Norwegian and Danish that I felt comfortable pursuing learning it.
Okay.
And there's a lot of technical, philosophical jargon or technical terms that translate, and so I was confident that I could go in there and learn. And it was very slow in the beginning, but it was several years, thousands and thousands of hours, and
no doubt.
I've been to Norway a couple of times, and you'll find anywhere in Scandinavia that pretty much anybody speaks almost perfect English.
Yeah.
So as a language learner, it's a little different than, say, going to France, where you're sort of expected to address people in French, and so there's a lot of practice opportunities. They might not go very well, but you just don't find that in Scandinavia. It's
that's what I've heard.
Ineffective to try to practice your broken Norwegian or Danish with natives, and so they easily slip into English. So it's very hard to learn, and plus the time it would take to become a fluent speaker of Norwegian, I just devoted that time to translating instead. I figured that was a more useful use of my time.
Certainly. I mean, it's incredibly ambitious, but I mean, you kind of picked the right work to try to do something like that with, right? Like, given the length of this monster, was it 570 pages or something? So by the end, you became quite fluent in reading it. I mean,
I'd say within a year to 18 months,
amazing.
it was I was looking up a lot less words, and so my reading increased quite rapidly.
Wow.
Maybe in 18 months or something like that.
That's pretty incredible. Ryan, I ask some version of this question to all of my guests. Why are you or are you not an antinatalist?
Yeah, so I would not characterize myself as an antinatalist, partly because to be honest with you, I don't have a deep enough knowledge of antinatalism. To be honest, I just haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah.
I've been spending time thinking about it since I got invited to do this podcast, naturally. But I mean, I'm aware of the position. I know some of the main arguments revolve around it, but I'm not well versed in it. But I would say, you know, I don't have any adamant opposition to it. It's an interesting position. I think, you know, at first glance, my response to it is maybe with a bit of skepticism, which is probably natural for anybody that would hear about it. And, you know, 4 or 5 sort of objections immediately come to my mind.
Yeah.
Most, if not all of them, I'm sure have been addressed in the antinatalist literature, probably on this podcast even. I think, you know, so one of the things that maybe causes me concern is, well, you know, this Dr. Benatar's asymmetry argument.
Yeah.
There's a debate out there online where Dr. Benatar is having a debate about antinatalism with Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yeah. It's been a while since I watched that one, but yes.
Yeah, and Jordan Peterson raises this objection, which would be sort of a classic objection against any utilitarian argument, that how are we supposed to measure these pleasures and pains, you know, the suffering involved in a human lifetime, and the pleasures or joys or whatever.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to measure them? I think Jordan Peterson said something like, he raised the example, you know, it's entirely possible that a few moments of romantic bliss could outweigh an entire lifetime of suffering. You know, that type of argument. I'm a little sympathetic to that argument, or at least interested in what kind of response could be given to it. But I have a couple other possible objections that involve some interesting paradoxes. Well, one objection, and this is what's interesting, is I think Zapffe raises, even though Zapffe is in a sense an antinatalist thinker, he raises objections.
Okay, interesting.
In On the Tragic, that at the very least need to be entertained by an antinatalist.
Sure. Okay.
You know, the strength of any argument is how well it responds to
100%.
objections. So the more you can get on the table, the better off you are.
Yeah.
So one of them, and I think this really comes from Schopenhauer. I'm of the opinion that Schopenhauer is probably the greatest influence on Zapffe, at least in On the Tragic. And you know, Schopenhauer in a short essay called "What Is Man?" that's in his later writings, he said that the greatest contributor to an individual person's happiness or unhappiness is their character. And by character, he means sort of their disposition, their temperament, we might say personality. So now we would say their hardwiring. So stuff that's completely out of their control.
Yeah.
And you have you know, people who, no matter how horrible their lives are, they still seem to be relatively happy. And then you have people, no matter how wonderful their lives are, they're
miserable.
Miserable. Yeah. So you have this component that sort of forms your experience of your life, that is sort of looming over how happy or unhappy a person might be. In fact, I think that like an asymmetry argument is going to be hard to make in that context, because you know, yes, I might be able to say that in my lifetime the pain, the suffering, the discontentment might outshadow the pleasures, but it'd be hard to say that about another person. At least that's a potential argument, and one that Zapffe himself raises.
And that's in On the Tragic.
Yeah, I have a couple quotes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them. Absolutely. Sure.
And you know, some people have made, especially Norwegian speakers, have made a point to emphasize Zapfe's sense of humor. And I think we see this especially as examples. And I think this is the very last example quote I gave you. Yeah, so Zapffe says, we are all aware from the daily press of the jubilant wife who has been ill and poor for 75 years. The husband has died at sea, 5 children are insane, 5 are crippled, and 5 are in prison, but she is in a good mood all day long. So this is, this is an example of Zapfe's gallows humor, or dark humor, whatever you want.
Because he was also a humorist.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. That is that is an incredible quote.
But that sounds a lot like Schopenhauer to me. And I think that it's raising this objection to, the influence of a person's disposition, temperament, hardwiring on how they, on paper, you could say that woman's life has had more suffering than joy, but her experience of it, that's another story.
Yeah.
I think I have one more quote that's like that too.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. I found it. Number 18 on the list I gave you there. He says it must at least, this is what I'm talking about, him raising a potential objection that at the very least antinatalists would need to address. It must at least be explained why an undeserved suffering is a physiognomic expression of a world being to a higher degree than a deserved suffering, a beneficial or fortunate course. A possible statistic might even show surplus on the positive side. So yeah, this is addressing the same issue. So that's a concern that I would have, and I'm sure antinatalists have talked about this objection already.
And I don't want to take up too much of our time by, this antinatalist trying to rebut Zapffe and those objections. But I guess what I would say is, certainly it always matters what an individual says about their the experiences of their own lives.
Right.
And, I think life is all kinds of things, right? It is suffering, or has those elements in it, but it's also got tons of joy and all kinds of my own life. I love doing this podcast. I have a huge toy collection. I'm an artist. I got it's not just one thing.
Right.
But I think there's what antinatalism, at least in the contemporary sense, is trying to get at is something a little beyond just the individual's experience. When we roll the dice with procreation, we're inevitably going to be creating some people, at least, that are not able to take any of those joys.
Right.
So there's all of this, perhaps even maybe a surplus of joy, but it is kind of coming at the expense of all of this misery that there is no hug that can cure. There is no sunshiny day that's going to alleviate. And there's just nothing that fixes that, and there's nothing that really justifies that in my mind, at least.
Yeah. And connected to this, and something that I think is important to think about is, if a person came to me and so the basic position of antinatalism, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's unethical to have children.
Yes.
And so if somebody came to me and asked me, do you think it's unethical to have children? I would answer like a good philosopher, and I'd say, well, it depends on what you mean by unethical.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think, like Dr. Benedar maybe is operating from a traditional utilitarian approach.
Probably not, actually. Probably more of a deontologist.
Okay.
But he doesn't say. He won't say.
Okay.
He won't say what school of thought he comes from.
Yeah, but as somebody who's studied Kant at length in his moral theory, when I hear the word unethical, I immediately think, okay, so are we talking about a moral obligation that I have as an individual, but that moral obligation is somehow connected to the moral obligations that all rational beings have?
Mm-hmm.
So is there a universalizability to this moral obligation?
Yeah.
And that immediately, the way Kant talks, if that were the case, that would immediately convert into some sort of ethical program that all rational beings should be working towards.
Yeah.
And so when I think about a universalizable antinatalist ethical program, that's where I start to think of some problems that might arise, which are obvious, and I'm sure you've talked about them before, but you basically would need to somehow convince all fertile human beings not to procreate, and that to me sounds like a far-fetched, impossible task.
Probably impossible. We're trying, but yeah. But
I think the instinct to reproduce is way more powerful than any philosophical instinct that the general population would or could ever have. And there's a couple of interesting paradoxes. One of them is, so if you're in a situation, or humans are in a situation where we need, the masses to take on a certain belief.
Mm.
It seems to me historically that the way that happens is usually through these exceptional individuals, geniuses who sway entire civilizations.
Yeah.
So this interesting paradox is that type of, if you're an antinatalist, that type of a genius or exceptional person who would have the ability to sway entire civilizations to think this way is most likely to emerge among antinatalists.
Probably.
If this goes back to Plato's Republic, where you talk about these, breeding programs where you want to maximize the exceptional abilities of certain sections of the population. So I think that, and then Zapffe may be referring to this type of person with the phrase "the last Messiah." You need a somebody you can sway a huge population. Well, if that person is most likely to be born to antinatalist parents, and antinatalist parents have ceased reproduction, then that person that could bring about the ethical program would never be born. So it's an interesting paradox.
Well, there's two points I want to bring up there. Is that, do you think that people are more programmed to have sex or to procreate? Because I think that procreation is likely, we're obviously we're biologically designed to procreate. There's no argument there.
Right.
But I think it's almost sort of like the DNA. Sex is the tool of the DNA to get us to do that. It sort of entices us with pleasure. It candies the procreation, essentially.
Yes, good one.
But procreation itself is more of a cultural mechanism, I think, at this point. And I
could see that, yeah.
And I also think, just before I forget, I mean, I think your other point about sort of the antinatalist super child, my parents weren't antinatalist.
Right. It's not a guarantee that that's where they're going to emerge. And this is what Plato's Republic addresses.
Right. Yes.
Sometimes you got to move the children around so that they end up with the right parents.
Yeah.
But the probability is they're more likely to emerge. Like a deep reader is more likely to be born to other deep readers. Doesn't mean that deep readers aren't born to non-readers, but they're more, the probability, just genetically, and then the environment that they're going to grow up in, they're more likely to emerge. But
do you think philosophy is genetic? There's a genetic component to the kind of philosophy that people
I think there's at least a component.
Okay.
Component that, and just the upbringing, being surrounded with philosophical talk and books and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's highly debatable.
It's a fun paradox to think about.
It absolutely is. I mean, it definitely is a conversation within antinatalism. Like, if you could produce a child, like some sort of magic happens, and you could absolutely produce a child who will grow up to, lead humanity to antinatalist extinction. Is it ethical to create that child? I mean, it's a thought experiment, obviously, and it wouldn't be ethical to do it. But it wouldn't be ethical to the child to do it. Right. But it would probably be, yes, it would probably be, it probably would be the most ethical thing to do to produce the child. So that given your suffering ends. Program. Yeah. But I don't, obviously that's never going to happen. No. And there are antinatalist schools of thought, like with, I don't even know if you know who David Pearce is. I mean, he's a soft antinatalist, he's a transhumanist mostly. Okay. And so he's, he wants to genetically re-engineer human beings so that procreation becomes ethical because we won't be producing people that suffer. Right. So there's all kinds of different attitudes that antinatalists take towards the future that aren't necessarily extinctionist. But I do think that antinatalists, I suspect anyway, that antinatalists are created by information. So it's sort of like if you think about a lot of the Christian Gnostic sects were antinatal, or they had sort of proto-antinatalist thinking. And the Cathars, there's some debate over whether they existed or blah, 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 but they were all murdered. You know, so their antinatalism couldn't survive. They had no internet. They had no way of sharing their
Right.
memes. You know, they probably did need to create children
Right.
in order to further their antinatalism, or their they were probably also vegetarians, and you know, I mean, they were very close to being vegan, blah blah blah. But I don't think we live in that world now.
No, it's a very different world. Yeah,
Yeah.
the possibilities have expanded incredibly. I'm very sympathetic to the argument that we haven't talked about, which is the fact that when a child is born, that child has not consented to live that life.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a strong argument to me. I don't know what to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, you do as a human being in times of suffering, or maybe
Yeah.
frequently in a lifetime, think, well, I didn't agree to this.
Yeah.
And normally we think of consent as essential to an ethical transaction like that, but of course it would be impossible to get that consent. So it
100%.
does start to sound.
I mean,
ridiculous.
it's funny. The consent argument is fascinating because some people vehemently believe that it's the strongest argument for antinatalism, and other antinatalists won't go near it because it seems to be talking about beings who don't actually exist, and there's an absurdity in it, and it's something that our detractors kind of pull apart. They pull that apart and then just shut off from there.
There's one other paradox that I find entertaining in sort of a sci-fi kind of way, and that is, you know, so talking about an ethical program, to bring extinction to the human race intentionally. So there's various ways you could go about doing that. One of them is to sort of disseminate antinatalist thought. And try to get everybody to think that way. But that might be a very ineffective way to do it. There might be more effective ways to do it. So, for example, maybe a nuclear holocaust is a much more effective way to bring extinction to the human race. And this starts to get pretty wild, because you might end up. So if you were convinced that you had an ethical obligation to bring the human species to extinction, that might and let's just say, for sake of argument, that the most effective way to do that would be through a nuclear holocaust. That would mean that what you should be spending all your time and energy towards is
constructing the red button,
trying to get a nuclear holocaust to happen. In other words, trying to promote it. And it seems like that would involve all sorts of wild, covert, and clandestine attempts to, you know, get great powers to have tensions rise. And it starts to sound, wow, this is really far away from where we started.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of liberation theology, where where Jesus's command to go into all the world and preach the gospel over time converts into, you know, running guns in Central America for communist revolutions. And it's, well, wow, how do we get from preach the gospel to every creature to now running guns? So there's something there that's interesting. Interesting paradox.
And believe me, all of those conversations are alive and well in the antinatalist sphere, much to the chagrin of half the community. But I mean, I think, you know, look, I am an ethical. What I think is well coined as ethical extinctionism. So yes, I do. Well, first of all, my and we'll kind of get to this subject too, especially because I think it does pertain somewhat to some of the material in The Last Messiah. Is I'm what's called the sentiocentric antinatalist. So I believe that humans, obviously, the antinatalism pertains to human beings. I'm for the cessation of procreation and the extinction of human life, but I also think that it pertains to animal life as well. That we have a responsibility to, you know, we're all the products of DNA, all living things. So if there's more suffering out there in nature than there is in, I mean, I know it's highly debatable, but I believe that there's more suffering in nature than there is in human existence, and I think we have a responsibility to the rest of animals to also prevent their procreation as well. And I think those are where the discussions on something like the red button, nuclear or whatever, sort of do come into play. That sort of like, well, we can do this. I mean, conceivably, anyway, theoretically, human beings could, through whatever mechanism, through whatever it's conceivable that we could extinct ourselves through antinatalism voluntarily.
Sure.
The animals you cannot make these arguments to lions.
No.
So I think that sort of becomes, so if we became extinct through antinatalism, would it be in our ethical remit to then destroy the planet or destroy the rest of sentient life?
Yeah.
And how do you do that in the most ethical way possible? There are also conversations about, we do it now today, even in today's world of sterilizing animals. Is that a way that we could, somehow ethically do that to the rest of life? I mean, there will be an extinction no matter what. I mean, whether antinatalism has absolutely no hold or power on
Guaranteed.
life itself. And I think at some point this conversation turns into, okay, how bad is that going to be?
Right.
And can we make it any better?
So you want to hasten it.
Yeah.
And alleviate as much suffering along the way as possible.
Yeah.
There's also the problem with the red button solution is that even if there were a nuclear holocaust, you'd still have humans who survive it.
Yeah, I mean, the red
they
button
would
is
immediately begin to procreate.
I know exactly.
So
it's not a solution either.
Even do it.
No, and that's why, I mean, I don't think any one solution or any one. That's why there is sort of. This needs to be the greatest, if this is the road that humanity takes.
Right.
If this is the future that humanity decides to go on, this has to be like the greatest human project of all time. I mean, it's, we can sit here on Zoom and have these discussions, but I mean, it really does have to be something that, minds need to, great minds need to be put toward.
Right. And I think there is, even in Kant, there's we talked about the position being sort of needing to be universalizable.
Yeah.
But I think there's places where Kant suggests that you might not be able to find anybody in the entire world who's fulfilling an obligation.
Yeah.
So you might have one person who says, yeah, I know nobody else is going to fulfill this moral obligation, but I'm still going to fulfill it. And so I'm sympathetic to that kind of position. I mean, I don't have children. It's not because I was an antinatalist. It was, I jokingly say it was because I can barely take care of myself. So that was why I didn't bring children into the world.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are people who become antinatalists after they've had children, which Zapffe addresses this actually.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a quote out there where he talks, well, you got me to nature, to God. You got me, but my wife and I are two. We only made one. So the math is right. We're going in the right direction.
He had a child?
No. He said
I'm
that
sorry.
if I were to have a child, then one could say, well, the math's going in the right direction, even though maybe I ultimately failed to not have children.
Didn't bring that many there.
Right.
I
haven't multiplied. My wife and I haven't multiplied the numbers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there certainly are a lot of antinatalist parents today. So I mean, it's
And I was also going to say that I think that throughout On the Tragic that Zapffe raises the issue of, I think you can have. We see this a lot in virtue theory, going all the way back to Aristotle, ancient Greeks, where there might be general moral obligations, but in practice they're different between people. So, for example, if you have Aristotle's big on virtues like courage or temperance, things like that. And so like in the temperance virtue, we're talking about eating and drinking and things like that. So if you're a linebacker in the NFL, what it means for you to overeat is very different than what it might mean for. I usually use the example of Billy Barty, but Billy Barty's long gone and most people don't
know who that is. I'm sorry.
He was a dwarf actor in the 70s, 80s. He was big. So whatever the equivalent would be, or any person of small stature, so if you have this general moral obligation to not overeat, what a person of small stature, what overeating is to them is very different than a linebacker in the NFL. So you can't have like an amount that all humans should restrain themselves from. And so I think you can have an antinatalist. I see it in On the Tragic, moral obligation for some. So Zapffe gives the example of a person who has some sort of exceptional ability. maybe to do philosophy or to write literature or whatever it is. And if they were to have children, that would get in the way of them sort of realizing this exceptional ability, putting it into action and so on. So would have, in that sense, if they have a moral obligation to maximize this exceptional ability that they've been born with, then that implies a moral obligation not to have children, because it would interrupt that. So this is sort of like a subjective antinatalist obligation.
Wow.
It wouldn't be an ethical program for all human beings, just for that particular person.
Right. Well, we can all only do the best we can, right? Like, it's fun
I love thinking about it.
I love thinking. Yeah, no, this is my favorite subject in the world. I mean, I don't really know if antinatalism will win, but I think for my part anyway, I think advocating it is the right thing to do. And
if the ultimate goal is the extinction of the human race, it will win, just maybe not by its own hands.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
we'll be able to take credit for it.
We're going to get our way one way or the other, but I mean, I'd prefer that it happens in the most ethical way possible, or as least suffering as possible. Yeah,
and you could say that limiting population, or slowing the growth of human population, or reversing the growth of human population, in the end, when the final wipeout occurs, if there's less that are being wiped out, you've still contributed something to it.
Yeah.
That was a long answer to
are
you an antinatalist and why?
But that was great. I honestly, is one of my favorite answers to that question, because the complexity. I much prefer people answer it in its full complexity than kind of run away from the question, which is what several people have done in the past. So I that was great. We got into a lot of great territory there. No, I know you're not. Of course not. Well, there's so much we could continue on that course for several hours, I'm sure. But I think we should perhaps go back to a bit of leading our way towards on the tragic. Yeah. Peter Wessel Zapffe is, of course, an extremely beloved and well-known author to those of us in the antinatal world, really primarily for his short story, The Last Messiah. However, for those out there that might be listening who aren't familiar with him at all, would you mind just telling our audience a little bit about who Zapffe was?
Yeah, so Zapffe was a Norwegian philosopher, born in 1899, died in 1990, not that long ago.
Not that long ago at all.
Had a conversation. Yeah. It was pretty amazing.
He could have been on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Yeah. Well, I'd got my act together sooner.
Yeah. He was more than a philosopher. He grew up in the far north part of Norway, a town called Tromsø. That's how we usually pronounce it in the English world. Tromsø, far north of the Arctic Circle, on the where the Atlantic Ocean and the Arctic Ocean meet, or about there, and a place surrounded by mountains. He grew up there. His father was owned the only pharmacy in the town, and so his father was well known, and they lived in the same building as the pharmacy, and the building's still there in Tromsø. And so I think Zapffe early on, I'm not sure exactly when his interest started, but he became a mountain climber.
Yeah.
And he actually climbed several peaks for the first time. He was the first person to climb several peaks. And he was a lover of mountain climbing. And he was a lawyer. He studied law and became an attorney in Norway. But he seems to have had an interest in philosophical thought and literature early on, maybe even to his childhood. He had sort of this looming philosophical discontentment in life. And so in the middle of his law career, he decided that he didn't want to pursue it anymore.
Yeah.
And he just went back to University of Oslo, studied literature, and he wrote on the tragic, the first version for his literature master's thesis. But I've heard people say it was Arne Næss. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce Arne Næss.
I'm not sure either.
Probably Arne, but anyways, we say Arne Næss convinced him to actually submit it for the PhD in philosophy.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a foreword to the 1983 Norwegian edition of On the Tragic that a different person is mentioned, Frederick Posch,
Okay.
who was an influence on Zapffe when he was at the University of Oslo, who convinced him to submit it
Okay.
for the PhD there. Anyways, you're asking about The Last Messiah and who Zapffe was. So he's a mountain climber,
Yeah.
philosopher. He wrote poetry. He painted. He wrote some plays, short stories, and so he had a wide range of interests. He's most widely known as a philosopher. He did some philosophy teaching, I think,
Yeah.
at the University of Oslo, but most of his time was spent writing and pursuing philosophy as a writing career rather than teaching career. Yeah, so that's who he is.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And did his law degree, was that a PhD as well? Did he have several PhDs?
I don't think it was a PhD. I think it was
Okay.
their equivalent of our JD,
Sure. Yeah.
whatever legal requirement Norway had to practice law. Yeah, so he was a practicing attorney for a while.
For a short period of time,
Yeah.
really, and then he went back to school. Okay.
Yeah.
And he also, would you agree that The Last Messiah and On the Tragic were the two works of his only that covered like antenatal themes?
I haven't read everything that he's written.
Yeah.
He wrote quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like in Norway, all of his works that are currently in print are published by the same publisher. It's called Pax
Yeah.
Forlag. Forlag's just publishing. And they have 10 books in print.
Wow.
And some of them are collections of shorter works. Some of them are one or two in the novel. One of them's a play. There's a couple plays actually. So I haven't read, and he was writing, into the 80s.
Right at the end of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I haven't read all of it. So I can't say for sure if there's not other antinatalist discussions in his later work, but
No, it's okay.
I think those are probably definitely On the Tragic is his most famous work.
Yeah.
And
The Last Messiah.
yeah, the way The Last Messiah is basically the only thing that's been translated into English until now, tells the story more of the English-speaking world's exposure to Zapffe than the Norwegian experience to him. He wrote a book, I forget what the name of it is, has with another person that has a bunch of humorous stories and some kind of connected to Norwegian folklore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That I think is actually his most famous book in Norway.
Right. From what I understand, or what I've been told by several people is like his more pessimistic work is not really what's put forward in Norway, right? Like it's not really the way they want to remember him.
Yeah,
I'm wrong about that.
I'm not sure if there's an effort to not put it out there, but I think it's a lot like Schopenhauer. He wrote his World as Will and Representation, which is in his mind is his greatest work.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, and he made no money off of it.
Yeah.
And nobody read it. And then later in his life, he wrote shorter, kind of pop philosophy short works, and that made him a superstar while he was still alive. So I think in Zapfe's case, it's some of the shorter works and the humorous works, and the works tied to Norwegian sense of life that made him more famous in Norway. But I will say this also, that I was in Oslo last year, and I think it was last year, and there's a place not too far from Oslo called Asker, which is where he spent the later years of his life working. And there's a museum there, the Asker Museum, that has a little reconstruction of his study. So I went to that. Yeah, you might have.
I think we have some pictures of it in there. Yeah.
And I went there, and a young college-age woman, you had to be let into, it was locked, the little study, she had to let me in. And I asked her about Zapffe, and she told me, there it is. She told me that, I asked her basically how popular is Zapffe in Norway, and she told me, well, I went to university and I'd never heard of him until I started working here. So that might give you a sense of how popular.
Yeah, I mean,
I think he's probably at the moment more popular in the English-speaking world than he is in Norway, which is strange.
I have gotten that similar sense just based on what other people have told me too. I mean, I think like Chiron, he's kind of seen this resurgence because he's been connected to the antinatalism. So
Right.
now he's an antinatal superstar
Right.
and has this new sort of lease on a legacy of sorts. Yeah. And how did your interest in Zapfe's work begin?
Well, I arrived at Zapffe through Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
Not through antinatalism. Like I said, I was interested in Kant for a long time.
Mhm.
I did a little bit of, I haven't done much publishing. I have one main article that I published based on my dissertation. And, I went to philosophy conferences and presented. And so I worked on Kant for a while, but I eventually became really, really interested in Schopenhauer. And most people only know Schopenhauer through his short essay on the vanity of existence.
Yeah.
And they don't know anything else about him. All they know about him is that he was a pessimist. That's all they say. In fact, when I was teaching at Henry Ford, there was a little bit of a revival. I was teaching history of modern philosophy class, and I would have a sort of a big section on Schopenhauer. I had a group of 10 or 12 students who got really, really interested in Schopenhauer. And so
Interesting.
that's all they wanted to talk about. And one of them went on to a major university in Michigan to study philosophy, and went for the orientation and told the philosophy professors there that she wanted to study Schopenhauer.
Uh-huh.
And the main, I guess,
Didn't go so well, huh?
well, they shook their heads, and one of them says, "But he's such a pessimist," which is totally predictable
Right.
that they would say that. She later pressed that professor, "Have you read Schopenhauer?" And the person had to admit, "No, I've never actually read him." So all she knew was that he was a pessimist.
Right.
But if you read Schopenhauer, like I spent several years reading closely every single thing that he wrote.
Yeah.
And he was a deep, deep thinker, and he wrote on a ton of subjects.
Yeah.
And it's not the case now, but say late 19th century through to the mid 20th century, I think he was hugely influential on philosophical thinkers, especially in Europe. And so I get the sense that Zapffe was, that's what led me to Zapffe, was I'm of the opinion that Zapffe, especially in On the Tragic, is continuing a discussion of the exact same themes that Schopenhauer was discussing in his World as Will and Representation.
Yeah.
That he's trying to further this same discussion. And so I became aware of that somehow, just poking around. And I also, I'm of the opinion that there's a big fork in the road in the history of philosophy with Hegel and Schopenhauer.
Okay.
They were contemporaries. And most people who know anything about Schopenhauer know that he hated Hegel.
Yeah.
And most people think it was because he was jealous. Hegel was a superstar.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the first philosophical superstar. And Schopenhauer, was working in obscurity. And so he had this envy and jealousy. And so he lashed out on Hegel. I think it's a real simplification of his opposition to Hegel.
I think Ligotti talks a little bit about that, actually. Yeah, I could be wrong, though.
Yeah.
Wrong.
If you read everything Schopenhauer wrote, his criticisms of Hegel are quite complex and sophisticated. He's opposed to Hegel on two fronts. One of them is Hegel's use of terms in a extremely abstract way that becomes divorced from reality.
Okay.
And the concept formation, we call it concept formation of Hegel, he's real critical of that these concepts are so abstract they've become meaningless. And then the other thing he's really opposed to was Hegel's view that history is actually headed in some direction.
Okay.
Hegel is a very, in a lot of ways, very Christian thinker. There's an eschatology to it that eventually we're going to get to freedom, the realization of freedom and all this. And this influences Marx, which it's very present in Marx.
Yeah.
This history headed in some direction. Schopenhauer, no, history is not heading anywhere.
Yeah.
If anything, it's circular, which Nietzsche picks up on later. So I got interested in Zapffe because I was interested in Hegel won the day. And we have this long, from Hegel, we have Marx, and we have, everybody after that. We have Foucault, we have Derrida. Every can be traced back to Hegel. And then the Schopenhauer path sort of got cut off. I mean, the natural successor to Schopenhauer is Nietzsche, but I mean, Nietzsche says in his early writings that he wrote an essay called Schopenhauer as Educator. He says, I learned everything I know from Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
He later was critical of Schopenhauer, but he's the natural successor to Schopenhauer, but Nietzsche's a world of his own.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I was really interested in sort of salvaging the Schopenhauer line.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to do that is to translate Zapffe into English, because I think
Yeah.
Zapffe is really, other than Nietzsche, the natural successor to Schopenhauer. I'm of that view.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I mean, do you what are you, I mean, as somebody who really has, great respect for Schopenhauer, I mean, do you sort of see, some people have had like this real pushback to the idea of Schopenhauer being sort of like the godfather of contemporary antinatalism. Do you sort of have that same feeling, like he should be credited for it more? Or
I know there's a couple quotes from Schopenhauer that sound very antinatalist.
yeah,
But I don't know. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do is to trace the emergence of an idea in the history of philosophy and try to look at the very first time it popped into existence. And anyway, I mean, the antinatalist thought goes all the way back, probably to
Salinas.
I see it in Sophocles, this quote about it's better to the number one thing is to have never been born. The second best is to die quickly.
Yep, that was a quote
passages like that
of Salinas, wisdom of Salinas.
Yeah. And then Nietzsche quotes that too. And so it's fun to follow those. And I think Schopenhauer would legitimately appear on that map or that constellation of thinking.
Yeah.
But he doesn't devote much time to it, I don't think.
No, and I don't suspect he would have been too hot on extinctionism.
Yeah, I don't think he would have.
But then again, a lot of antinatalists aren't too hot on extinctionism, so I mean, that's always kind of a complicated subject, no matter where people fall. But
yeah, so I came to Zapffe through Schopenhauer, and so what I was looking for in Zapffe was probably quite different than what an antinatalist who was trying to, an English-speaking antinatalist trying to read the Norwegian, they'd probably be looking for something quite different. Although there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of the foundations of antinatalism are present in other thought.
Sure.
Schopenhauer definitely championed.
Yeah. No, thank you for your insight into that. I mean, I think, many would say, and you started in the best place possible, honestly. I mean, many consider, leaving Schopenhauer aside for a second, but I mean, Zapffe is considered by many to be the best place to begin one's process of going, even more than Benatar, just because it's such a, I mean, and I tend to agree. I mean, but do you consider yourself a Zapffe scholar in a wider sense? Meaning, have you done a great deal of research into his other works and about his life? I mean, we've spoken a little bit about this already, but
well, I'm definitely not an expert on his life.
Yeah,
I mean, my interest in the details of a philosopher's life becomes pretty limited. I'm mostly interested in what they said.
Yeah.
If they said something that I think is worthy to be sort of in the canon of the history of philosophy, which I definitely think On the Tragic is. But I find Zapfe's life interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know nearly as much about it as there are other people out there who are just a wealth of information. They seem to know everything about him.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not an expert on his life. And then his thought, his writings, I'm definitely not an expert on all, his entire collection of writings, because I haven't read them all. But when it comes to On the Tragic in the English speaking world, I mean, it has to be that I know the book better than anybody else in the English speaking world, who doesn't also know how to read Norwegian.
Yeah.
So I in one sense, I think I know for English speakers, I know the book better than anybody. I think by now I've read it about 7 or 8 times.
Wow.
I'm still processing most of what's in there, but
yeah.
So if I'm an expert on Zapffe at all, it's only in that respect.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, but it's a giant respect.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a respect.
It's yeah, I know. It's a respect, but it's a giant respect for sure. We talked a little bit about this already, but I was curious if you had any insight into how Zapffe is perceived in his home country today, particularly how his antinatalism is received or perhaps ignored, as the case may be. From what I understand, I mean, he is something of a national treasure
Sure.
in Norway. But that I've heard anyway that there's some degree of fear surrounding his pessimism and antinatalism. Would you say that that's true? And if so, do you believe that that has contributed to On the Tragic not making it into the English language until now?
Yeah, I think there's, like I said before, I think he's beginning to be forgotten in Norway.
Yeah.
There are, like there's a statue in Tromsø of him.
Yes.
And I think you're right that he is a national treasure, but I think the younger generation, most of them probably don't actually know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's sort of gone full circle where his antinatalist interest in the English-speaking world and beyond the English-speaking world has come full circle back to Norway, and there are people in Norway influenced by that movement.
Yeah.
And they sort of discover their own
heritage of
Yeah.
Within their own heritage.
So that's the sense that I have now. I've never gotten the sense that Zapffe is too pessimistic or too dark a thinker for Norwegians. I don't think Norwegians
surprise
and
me.
Danes care that much about. They're very dark thinkers in general. I don't know if you watch much Danish and Norwegian
I have
film and
yeah,
TV.
it's pretty dark.
They are not afraid to dig around in really dark subjects. So I don't think that they're hesitant.
Well, their music, reason. Norwegian black metal. I mean,
yeah.
So
they birthed the black metal.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're afraid of Zapffe. Although I think Scandinavian people are busy. They have a real get to work attitude, and I think they get jobs that keep them busy, and they have families, and they devote themselves entirely to it. So they're probably not thinking a lot about these wider topics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, that's fair enough. I only know 2 Norwegian antinatalists, I think. But it's always just interesting, where it's as a movement it's taking hold or not.
Yeah, I'll also say this. Sorry.
No, not at all.
At some point, I think it's in his preface to On the Tragic, Zapffe says that philosophy has never been at home in Norway. And I'm not exactly sure what he means by that.
Okay.
But he seems to be suggesting that Norwegian culture has never been particularly philosophical, which I find that surprising, especially since Denmark, I perceive as a very philosophical country, and they used to be one kingdom. They used to be one country.
Yeah.
Norway and Denmark.
Yeah.
And I mean, we think about Kierkegaard in Denmark.
Exactly.
So I think of the Danes as very philosophical. I'm surprised that he said that philosophy is not at home in Norway. But
perhaps that was a bit of a jab.
Yeah,
at
could be
the existent Norwegian philosophy.
Yeah, so maybe that has something to do with a lack of interest, if there is a lack of interest in Zapffe in Norway.
No, thank you for your insight into all of that. That's really, I mean, through the works of Thomas Ligotti and others, Zapfe's The Last Messiah has become, I think is one of the ways he's become so well known to antinatalists.
Mm-hmm.
But what other works by Zapffe are not currently in English that you would like to see translated? I know he wrote apparently a textbook with Arne Næss that tore the two of them apart, from what I understand. But in any case, I mean, would you have any interest in being the translator for those works in the future?
So there are. I mentioned that the Norwegian publisher of Zapffe has 10 books.
Yeah,
9 other than On the Tragic, and yes, I'm very interested in some of them. I've only read maybe 2 or 3 others, and I actually started translating one of them. He wrote a play.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
He wrote a couple plays, actually.
Yeah.
The one that I was particularly interested in was it was a story about a sort of a rewriting of the Jesus narrative.
Okay.
And it's pretty shocking because and I think he wrote it shortly after On the Tragic was published. I think it was published in 1951, On the Tragic 1941.
Yeah.
But things he's said suggest that it's sort of a dramatic representation of what's going on the tragic.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
basically you have the figure of Jesus as the ultimate quintessential tragic
Okay.
figure. He calls Jesus, he also wrote a biography of Jesus that is just sort of straight nonfiction, but
Wow. I had no idea.
yeah, he calls Jesus a psychopath.
Wow.
Yeah, so Zapffe wrote this play about Jesus. It's called Den Vertappte Zoon, which is, it's usually translated the prodigal son. I'm not so sure
Okay.
that's the right translation. It might be the lost son, but basically Jesus is presented as this sort of person who has exceptional abilities in certain areas. It's a bit of a genius, maybe a major genius, but the emergence of that genius in him is connected to psychopathic tendencies.
I want this play.
I'm about 2/3 of the way through first translation of it. It's fascinating, and it has whatever you think about the historical veracity of the gospel stories, he addresses this notion that Jesus was born of a virgin. I don't know how much of this is playful, how much of it he thinks is actually maybe correct, but in the play, the father of Jesus is actually King Herod.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Wow.
so, King Herod
Drama.
comes to town and seduces Mary, and then Jesus' constant claim of being the king, a rightful king, is actually tied to
He's the prince.
his awareness of
Right.
eventually Herod being his father. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's a fun read.
Yeah.
But I think that it's Zapffe trying to present a literary figure who exemplifies the way he formulates the tragic, the tragic. So I've been working on that, and I'm very interested in it.
That's exciting.
Like I said, he also wrote a nonfiction biography of Jesus. I'm interested in that too, because it's probably some of the same thought. And there's a lot of short writings by him that I'm very interested in, and I've started to translate a few of them. He wrote a I guess it's a bit of a textbook. I don't know if this is the one you're referring to, but it's on logic. It's basically, I think he put it together when he was teaching
I think that might be
logic
it.
at the University of Oslo.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, but I don't know how much. There's a lot of resources. There are a lot of resources out there on, teaching logic to beginners, and I don't know how important that would be.
Might be kind of outdated.
Yeah.
But a historical document nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm interested in it. I started
Yeah.
translating it, but so I'm working on several fronts
That's awesome.
right now, translating other Zapffe stuff, and
Yeah.
so we'll see where that goes.
And despite maybe no antinatalism in those, as we were sort of discussing before, do you think that was at all in conversation with sort of his influence from Kierkegaard and his sort of Jesus obsessions?
I suspect that Kierkegaard did have a significant influence on him just because of the world he lived in.
Yeah.
I think, a major Danish philosopher would have had an impact on him naturally. Sure. To be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of Kierkegaard. I've always found Kierkegaard difficult to read. I don't know if it's the translations or if just his thought. Kierkegaard's another big opponent of Hegel, contemporary and opponent.
Yeah.
And even though he's a huge opponent of Hegel, I think a lot of the things that I find undesirable in Hegel are present in Kierkegaard too, which is
interesting.
This wild, unrestricted, abstract use of concepts.
Yeah.
The concept formation is just completely divorced to any accountability of any kind. And
interesting.
So I've always had a hard time reading Kierkegaard. So I don't know him that well, but Zapffe does mention him a couple times in On the Tragic. And I think he's probably well versed in his thought.
Without question. Yeah. I know very little Kierkegaard, I have to say. It's only Kierkegaard's, I think it comes from his diaries, really, his musings that are very Christian antinatalist. When he sort of railed against the Danish church for being too much of, he was against marriage and all of yeah, he
I know
he
it's-
thought that the church had sort of lost its
Yeah,
antinatal way,
yeah.
basically. Yeah.
I know as much probably about his life as I do his philosophy. I know Fear and Trembling fairly well, and
Okay.
his
Yeah.
whole Abraham Isaac argument, things like that. But
Yeah.
I just always found him difficult to glean
For sure.
a lot of useful stuff. But I'm not saying it's not there. I just
Yeah.
have that difficulty with it.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you. There's a kind of Zapffe fan club on the internet with people like Norwegian antinatalist and Zapffe expert Andreas Moss, who even used to run a website called Planet Zapffe, and Tim Ozekis. Hey, Tim. Hey, Andreas. Who have been in touch? Have you been in touch with any of these modern Zapffians?
I have been in touch with both Tim and Andreas.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how you and I
Mhm,
came together. Tim, who's in Melbourne, Australia, somehow got word that I had completed this translation, even though I had told virtually nobody.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me though.
He got word that I had completed this translation, emailed me about it with a lot of questions, and we started a email exchange. And yeah, I've talked to him at length about a lot of different topics. And then he also put me in touch with Andreas, who's in Norway and actually lives and I believe grew up in Tromsø, the same town Zapfe's from. Walks by Zapfe's house on a regular basis, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've had extended conversations with him by email as well. So both of them, yes, and it's been great. And then Tim told me early on that about you and this podcast.
Mhm.
This would be a great place for you to be interviewed and talk about the translation, things like that. Put us in touch,
Mhm.
which I don't know how much of this you want me to tell. You can cut it
No,
out.
go ahead.
Cut
Yeah,
it
no,
out.
it's fine.
Yeah, so I said, great, that sounds great. Where's Amanda located? He said, Chicago. I said,
And lo and behold,
hey, wait
yeah.
a minute, I live in Chicago. And then you and I started talking. And I was picturing, hopping on the train and going to another
That's
neighborhood.
exactly my thoughts as well. Yeah.
And it said, we started talking, and I said, well, where are you located? And it turns out your building is 2 blocks away from my building.
Yeah. I still can't get over that. I mean, proving the world is a very small place after all.
So a Zapffe guy in Australia puts us together. We live 2 blocks apart. So yeah, and then on top of that, we ran into each other on the street.
We probably, as I've said to you several times, we probably run into each other on the street like many times over the years.
I watched a couple episodes of your
funny.
podcast. Once I had a face walking down the street, I saw you. Wait a minute, you're Amanda, aren't you? So
I sure am.
yes, that worked out greatly. And
Yeah.
So I know the two of them, and I kind of wish I had known them before.
Yeah.
Because they're a lot. They are a wealth of information, and they have tons of resources.
Incredible.
I think Andreas has been working on a Zapffe documentary, so
Mhm.
he knows everything about his biography. Tim knows tons of stuff. So yeah, I wish I'd known them ahead of time.
They are both authorities
Yeah.
on the subject in an incredible way. So yeah, so I mean, thank you to Tim for
Yes, thank you.
because I received a message on WhatsApp just like, hey, can you interview Ryan? I'm like, yeah, sure. So thank you Tim for making this all happen. And it really is incredible the way it all worked out. But yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I really do. We'll talk more about this later too, but I do think it's really amazing the ways, especially given what we've already said about maybe Zapffe sort of being forgotten a bit in his own country, the ways that he's sort of taking on this new second life now that antinatalism is
even
becoming
in Norway,
even in Norway, and all over the world. So now I'd love to talk a little bit about The Last Messiah before we get really heavily into on the tragic. So before we get to the real fireworks of our discussion today, yeah, I mean, The Last Messiah is definitely Zapfe's most well-known work in English, as we've said, probably the only piece of Zapfe's writing that's been available in English that's been published, outside of like fan translations and that kind of thing. If you wouldn't mind, again, for those in our audience who may not have ever read The Last Messiah, what is it and what are your thoughts on the piece?
Yeah, well, so The Last Messiah is a short essay. I think it's about 10 pages, 10 pages, something like that. And it's the essay starts out very poetic with a story about a guy. It sounds a bit prehistoric.
Yeah.
But who knows when the time frame's supposed to be. But a guy who goes out to hunt. I think his wife sends him out to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And he's there under the starry sky, and he's by the watering hole, and he starts to experience sort of he has an experience of the suffering of all
Yeah.
beings, basically. And I think he comes home empty-handed. He ends up back at the watering hole later, and so he doesn't hunt. He abandons hunting. He just sort of sits there in the suffering, I think, and then maybe some sort of empathy.
Yeah.
And then eventually they find him dead by the watering hole, which it doesn't say how he died, but I assume the way the story's set up that it was suicide. That's my assumption. There's no other indication of some other way that he could have died. And then Zapffe, from that story, builds sort of an argument. He basically asks the question, if this is the cosmic situation of human beings, why aren't all human beings abandoning life, committing suicide, checking out, something like that?
Yeah.
And then he tells us, he gives us these 4 different sort of mechanisms that human beings in general tend to employ to sort of keep the reality of the cosmic situation at bay. They're the isolation, anchoring, distraction, and sublimation, the Freudian term.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically builds a case that this is the reason why human beings don't seem to be particularly upset about their cosmic situation is because of these mechanisms, psychological mechanisms have been employed to sort of keep it at bay. And that's basically the gist of the essay. And those, by the way, those 4 mechanisms are present in On the Tragic, except in much greater detail.
Mm-hmm.
And not just those 4 mechanisms, but additional mechanisms. He calls them solutions. There's real solutions and pseudo solutions.
Okay.
And there's myriad of these various attempts that humans make to keep the cosmic situation at bay, both real and pseudo, more pseudo than real. It's very Freudian. I mean, this sounds a lot like Freud.
Yeah.
And I think Freud had a huge influence on Zapffe.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
He references him a couple times, and at one point, Freud's still alive at the time when he was writing this, and he says something about Freud's wonderful discoveries. And so I think he was sort of in the throes of Freud's theories being presented to the world for the first time.
Yeah.
Some of them were much earlier, but so that's The Last Messiah. And I will say this, I don't know if you were going to ask it, but so I think The Last Messiah was published in 1933.
Yeah.
My understanding, and we have a quote connected to this we can look at later, is that Zapffe began working on the Tragic 11 years prior to its publication. So that would that would put us at 1930.
Okay.
So we can infer from that he worked on the Tragic and The Last Messiah at the same time.
Okay.
So
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So that's why there is overlap, a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
I think The Last Messiah is like a truncated, smaller, more concise version of some of the arguments in On the Tragic.
And I mean, in my opinion, anyway, it is really a masterpiece. I mean, it's just a beautiful piece of work. I think it is still to this day one of the finest sort of contemplations of antinatalism, I think extinctionism, pessimism, just the place, just sentientism too.
Yeah, I would put it up there with Schopenhauer's On the Vanity of Existence, which people love to quote, and it's a fun read, even though it's extremely dark.
Yeah.
I think, The Last Messiah is sort of the new On the Vanity of Existence.
Yeah,
except with more poetic and elements to it. I mean, Schopenhauer is an amazing writer.
Yeah.
Zapffe just maybe plays more with, fictional elements.
Yeah, for sure. I also, I mean, this is just my opinion. I think there's probably going to be a lot of disagreement about this, but I also think it was incredibly ahead of its time as an antinatalist work too, because, I mean, there's all kinds of disagreements about its sentiocentrism, its sort of promortalism, its extinctionism, but it does bring up all of these questions. It brings up these questions that are very a part of really like the cutting edge of what
Oh, yeah.
contemporary antinatalism is today. And a lot of works wouldn't do that
Right.
for a long time afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm of the
So it's
opinion
very
that
fresh.
that's what makes a philosophical work great,
Yeah.
is that people are arguing about what it actually means.
Yeah, I 100%.
If you just
I feel
have
the same way.
some philosophical work that says, okay, this is the way it is, ABC, boom,
Yeah.
we're done. Everybody says, okay, that's all it means. If you're not arguing about what it even means, then I would say it's not particularly deep.
Well, then we got it all solved. There's nothing to talk
Yeah,
about,
I'm still
right?
trying to figure out what Plato meant. And,
Yeah.
yeah, and I worked on for a long time. Kant scholars are arguing still about
Oh, yeah.
what the categorical imperative even means, what it implies. So yeah.
Yeah. And I've been told, though I do think it's probably wrong, The Last Messiah is not included in On the Tragic, is it?
No.
Okay, all right.
It
That takes
is
care of
not
that then.
part of the book, but was written at the same time.
At the same time,
that
yeah.
he's thinking about the same topics at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were not published together. The Norwegian version of it is published in a collection of shorter works.
I see. Okay. And I mean, how did it come to be the only piece of Zapffe that we have in English before you came along?
That's a great question. I'm not exactly sure. There's, at the very end of On the Tragic, there's a summary.
Okay.
And Zapffe published it in English
Yeah.
from the start.
Really?
I'm not sure if I suspect that he himself translated it. He does seem to have a command of English to a degree.
Huh. Okay.
I mean, he quotes Bertrand Russell in English. He uses a lot of English terminology in On the Tragic. So I think he probably had at least a basic understanding of English, maybe an advanced one. I don't actually know. But anyways, this summary, I don't think it's particularly helpful. Like I don't read it and say, yeah, that definitely captures the entire book. A lot of the terminology in that English summary is a bit different from the terminology he uses in the book. So I'm not sure when it was written. So that's been in English from the beginning.
Wow.
1941.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody really read it. I don't know how. I think Tim and Andreas might know how.
I'll have to.
I know there was the translation of Last Messiah that I first came in contact with, which I think is the way most English speakers did, was published in Philosophy Now magazine.
Yeah, that's how I know of it.
Gives we probably would say 10 genus. I think it's more like 10 genus.
Okay. Yeah.
That was in 2004, I think.
I believe so.
But there's an earlier English translation.
Yeah, there were 3.
Yeah.
Apparently.
So
well, that brings
I don't know if the earlier one, which was 93 or 4 or something like that.
I unfortunately didn't write down the dates. I should have. But there's 3 translations. So there's this name and Reed.
Yeah, something like Cavaloy and Reed. I think Reed is a Brit.
And then Rael.
Cavaloy is a Norwegian or Dane, I think.
Mm.
And then Reel, I think Trine Reel is a philosophy professor in Ireland, I believe.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if she's from Ireland. Trine sounds a bit Irish. Or if she's actually Danish or Norwegian. But I came across the Tenyen's translation first.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the one that exploded.
Yeah, because that's the one that's available free. I mean, I think several of them are online, but
I think that Philosophy Now magazine had a reach that allowed it to be spread far and wide.
Well, again, we're getting into a bunch of little topics that we've skirted already, but I think they're important to kind of go back over. I mean, within The Last Messiah, there is a real nod to human extinction.
Mm-hmm.
Know thyself, be infertile, and let the earth be silent after ye. I mean, that is just such an incredible line.
Passage,
yeah, and just one of the most famous lines from the story. As you might be aware, extinction is one of those subjects in antinatalism that antinatalists are extremely divided over. Some take like more of a conditional approach, others just ignore the subject entirely, and others are extremely pro-extinctionist. So my question is, where do you think Zapffe would have stood on the question of extinction? Do you think he would have considered himself a pro-extinctionist?
I find it hard to believe that he would be a strong pro-extinctionist.
Okay.
I mean, he doesn't seem to really be issuing some sort of call for some ethical program to bring it about, at least in my reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, he talks quite a bit about the extinction of various species, and at least in the animal kingdom, they just come about automatically.
Yeah.
Like he gives this illustration, which is also in The Last Messiah, of this. I translate it the Irish giant deer because I think that's one of its
Yes.
main names. Sometimes called an elk.
Mm-hmm.
That supposedly evolved to have such giant antlers. They were too big and heavy. It would get caught up in thickets, bow its head down, required too much calcium productions, and so eventually it became extinct. It's not exactly clear if he's correct that that's what happened. I think it's partly speculation. I don't know if a zoologist or a biologist would
That's a good
say,
point.
yeah,
I don't know.
that's definitely how that thing became extinct. It's possible, but
It's
there might be
as an
other-
image though, as
Right.
a device.
It's great. It's great as a device, and
Yeah.
in On the Tragic, it gives us a couple other devices that might actually work better.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But so I think extinction is present in his discussions
Yeah.
of evolution and of evolutionary psychology. And if you were to ask him, do you think that the human species is going to become extinct because of its nature?
Or convictions or
Yeah, something about its makeup or the way it's evolved to be. I think he might say yes. Because he does seem to claim, at least tentatively, that the human species is a tragic species, and a tragic species is one whose downfall occurs, and possibly extinction with that. So that deer, that Irish giant deer, is a tragic species.
Right.
Its greatness led to its downfall. The splendor of its antlers, I mean, it could defeat any enemy just by flipping it over with its giant antlers. And so I think it's the greatness of that species that led to the downfall of that species. And he's sort of using that as an analogy for humans. That humans have some greatness in a sense, but it's likely to lead to the human's downfall as a species. Does that mean extinction? I don't know. I don't see him calling for some sort of ethical program to intentionally bring it about.
Yeah, I mean, well,
he might not be bothered by it, but
that's more the sense I get, actually. It's more a matter of he wouldn't be bothered by it. And I want to jump on that subject again just in a second, but just going back to the deer, do you think that he was more making a comment on like unintelligent design, that that this deer has been like this majestic, beautiful creature has been, that obviously no God had a hand in creating it, because it's got this flaw that,
right.
its greatest strength is what's breaking its neck, kind of thing, right? Do you think there was any flavor of that in there?
Well, Zapfe's discussion of God and it is very interesting, and it factors prominently in On the Tragic. And he even had, not just the Christian God, but other gods, the Greek gods, and so on.
Yeah.
He does say at one point in the book that talking about the story of Zeus, I don't know this story particularly well in Greek mythology, but maybe the Fates giving Zeus wine at some point. And he makes the claim that nobody has really pursued the idea that the universe might be under the control of gods who are blind drunk at the wheel.
Yeah, I've heard this. Yeah.
So I don't think he would be in favor of a view that thinks the universe is just completely chaotic and unordered, but that the order is definitely out of whack.
Okay. Yeah.
There are disproportions between justice and obligations.
Okay.
There are disproportions between ability and need. The evolution of living species is sort of out of control. As if drunk gods were
interesting
controlling it.
No, that's a fascinating answer. Thank you. I mean, going back to the extinctionism a little bit, I'm misplacing the gentleman's name, but and you brought him up earlier. He's a Zapffe scholar who was a guest on another podcast called the Hermetics podcast.
Oh, is it Rua Fremstadal?
Yes,
Rua.
yes, and I really loved a lot of what he had to say about Zapffe in that essay. Well, his essays and also that interview.
Yeah.
But he talks about how during the Cold War, Zapffe was very in favor of NATO, and he sort of defended the use of nuclear weapons. And Tim actually provided, couldn't find the exact quote, but Zapffe apparently said, and is quoted in a book by this person. I don't know who wrote the book. It's called I Choose Truth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This is yes.
And it was
I Choose Truth.
It was a book from 1983. I'm sorry I don't have all of the details, but it was on page 60. And at least a Google translation of that comes out to, for me, an uninhabited island is no tragedy, nor a globe which is free from the feverish fungus of life, e.g. the moon. Which is, just think is like such an amazing quote.
Yeah.
So
an island, where is it again? Yeah. For me, a desert island is no tragedy. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this goes back to what I said before about extinction. I think what I said, Zapffe probably wouldn't be bothered by it. He didn't sound particularly bothered, does he?
No. I mean,
but yeah, I know in his later life, I don't know when that happened, 1983.
that's when the book is from anyway. I don't
yeah.
know if that's,
I know later in his life, Zapffe spent a lot of his time writing about the environment. And
yes.
Preservation, conservation of wilderness areas and mountains and things like that. I haven't read much of that, but
yeah,
I don't see him trying to issue an ethical program devoted towards
I don't
extinction,
either.
but I don't think he'd
No.
be particularly bothered by it. And
but it did surprise me
yeah,
because conversations around nuclear weapons, red button kind of stuff, more of the negative utilitarian stuff.
Right.
That's like, I think there's a certain amount of protectionism against some of the older, like pre-Benatarian antinatalists of like, well, they never went near any of that kind of stuff.
right.
So it just surprises me that that's something he said, like.
And it's his position on NATO is interesting. Well, first of all, you got to put him in context. He lives in Norway, which shares a border with Russia, and shares a lot of commercial interests with Russia. And you also have to put in the context of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Russia, a very different entity then than it is now.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but here's a wild thought. We talked about the red button solution. If your antinatalism activism, if the most effective way to bring about the extinction of the human race is a nuclear holocaust, then an antinatalist should immediately devote all their time and energy to bringing about a nuclear holocaust. Well, maybe that's what's going on in NATO now.
Well,
they sure aren't doing a very good job of restraining it. So maybe there's a bunch of antinatalists in there covertly trying to stir up.
If that were the case, I would hope that they'd be doing a better job of alleviating some suffering at the same time. They've got this plan. Yeah, I don't think that's what's going on, but
wouldn't that be wild?
But that would be kind of wild. Yes, it would. Yes, it certainly would.
Maybe a good movie.
Well, I really do hope that antinatalism can achieve its goals through great arguments. I'm still haven't given up on covert. Yeah, I mean, I as cool as antinatalist ninjas might be, great arguments would be much better.
And then infusing art with
absolutely
the
100%
spirit of those arguments.
Yeah, big
that's where the
part.
propagation can really
exactly
happen.
I mean, I think I always think that antinatalism is this sort of threefold thing. It's a philosophical position, it's a growing social movement, but it's also a little bit of an art movement.
Yeah.
And that plays into both big time. And I'm a big proponent.
And the spread of social
art
movements always happens through art.
Absolutely. And there's been some incredible art already.
Oh, cool.
I'll have to show you some.
I know a few things. Yeah.
Do you?
Well, I know that I think you were going to ask me about True Detective, which is a great example.
Yeah. We'll definitely touch on that in a little bit. Do you just finishing off our discussion of, well, for now anyway, of red buttons and all that kind of stuff? Do you think that Zapffe was a negative utilitarian? Because the consensus on this is very divided. amongst others.
You mean negative utilitarian in the sense of trying to actively bring about?
Yeah, I mean, it gets tricky. I mean, it's for, I have another, well, maybe I should ask this question first. I mean, there was a sort of, on the Hermetics podcast, Ro
Fremsedal, yeah.
again, so he asked, the host of that podcast asked him, and maybe we've covered enough of this already, I don't know, but it's interesting nonetheless. I mean, he asks, Ro, do you think there's a practical Zapffian morality? Do you think that Zapffe saw his ethical standards as something that we should try to actualize?
Yeah. Do you know what his answer was?
I don't know why, but I didn't actually write it down. So, I mean, as somebody who's interested in anti-natalist activism, I just sort of wonder,
yeah, it's a very interesting question.
His mind went there.
I know Rua Fremsedal, when I started translating on the tragic, I knew I was going to run into some very difficult passages that I would need some help from a native Norwegian, preferably somebody who had a lot of philosophical knowledge and knowledge of Zapffe. And so Rua Fremsedal is one of those people that I solicited to help me.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
And the other one is Jürgen Hova, who's a Zapffe scholar. And both of them helped me immensely. I would, if I ran across a really difficult passage, I would shoot them an email and they would try to help me. They're very busy people, but they helped me. They wrote endorsements for the back of the
Oh, that's fabulous.
Both
I'm glad to know that. Yeah.
But yeah, I know Rua Fremsedal works in ethics and in Kant, and but he's also written on Zapffe. I'd be interested to hear what his answer is. My sense of On the Tragic is that Zapffe is not giving us sort of a new ethical theory or prescription per se. If you read, in a lot of ways, I think he's kind of a traditionalist. There's a long section of On the Tragic where he talks about criminal law. Mm-hmm. He's trying to establish a concept of guilt or blame.
Okay.
And his concept of guilt in the book is amazing, and will be talked about quite a bit eventually, I believe, in the world. And so he looks at traditional criminal law and contemporary to him, Norwegian criminal law. He's also a lawyer, so he's well versed.
Keep forgetting about that law background.
Yeah. And he sounds very traditional. He's like, well, let's look at what the legal tradition, philosophy of law has said about the concept of accountability and blame and guilt. And he, when he talks about morality, he talks about it in pretty traditional terms, either utilitarian or a Kantian framework, even a virtue framework quite a bit.
Interesting.
And I don't see any sort of new ethical theory he's trying to issue.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of, I get the sense from Zapffe that he's not even come to any firm conclusions. That he's just trying to contribute to a conversation that's ongoing and will continue after him. He's just trying to introduce new elements to the conversation or improve the focus of it. And so it reminds me a little bit of Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer is often credited for giving a new moral prescription, which is sort of this Buddhist denial of the will, shut down will completely, and then you become a compassionate person. I cannot find that anywhere. There's only one place in all of Schopenhauer's writings where he calls that phenomenon an ideal. He doesn't seem to be saying, hey, everybody out there, you should all deny the will and become peaceful and compassionate. I think he's saying this is a phenomenon that happens. Sometimes people's suffering or knowledge brings them to a point where they cease to will. And have this strange compassion emerge from their lives. It's just a phenomenon that happens.
Right.
I can't really find a strong claim that he thinks you should pursue it.
Yeah.
And I think the same maybe is true of Zapffe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he's saying, hey, everybody out there, I don't want to have children and you shouldn't either.
Yeah.
least I don't get a strong sense of that.
No, I mean, based on everything you've told me, I don't either. I mean, it's just really fascinating to think about what he would think about antinatalism trying to develop into a social movement. What he would
Right.
think about, there are some like proto NGOs now, like Stop Having Kids, who put up billboards,
Right.
about this kind of stuff. But the one thing it does make me think about, because I keep forgetting about his law background.
Yeah.
Is what he would have thought about things like wrongful life cases, trying to create legal precedent around issues of procreation. I mean, there was a friend of mine who became incredibly famous in India. His name is Raphael Samuel, and he actually didn't do it. He didn't go through with it, but he threatened to sue his parents for not getting his consent to bring him into life,
fun.
and it became this incredible international sensation.
Is it a criminal suit or a civil suit?
I think it was a civil suit, but yeah, maybe I'm not sure honestly, but no, it definitely wasn't a criminal suit, but he didn't go through with it. But I wonder what Zapffe would have thought of something like that.
I'm sure he would have found it entertaining. I'm sure he would have also had a lot of legal thoughts about it, because his legal acumen in the section on tragic about criminal law is incredible. He has such a great grasp of not only the history of criminal law and how different forms of it came about, but also the contemporary situation it finds itself in the directions it's developing in, and so on.
I kind of had this little beginning of a story in my mind now of like Raphael Samuel goes through the suit and Zapffe is his lawyer, like it would be amazing.
I could see, there's a wide range of audiences for On the Tragic, and people who work in philosophy of law and criminal law. That's one of the audiences. I could see people who work in philosophy of law discussing what he says in there about it.
Wow, that's
divorced from the rest of the book.
I never would have considered that, but that's amazing. Yeah. I hope to see that
quite
happen.
A long section.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. Okay, I have one more question about The Last Messiah, and then there's so much to talk about in The Last Messiah. I know I've kind of whittled it down to almost nothing, but we certainly, On the Tragic is quite the beast, so we'll get to that in a second. But I definitely wanted to touch on a point that's sort of a bit of a passionate subject for me, is that another point that antinatalists are incredibly divided on is the place of animals within antinatalism. Some antinatalists are extremely anthropocentric. They are only concerned with human procreation and or human extinction, and other antinatalists are sentiocentric. They advocate things like going vegan, the ending of factory farming, as well as intervening in animal procreation, both domestic and wild. Something that I found very interesting in regards to The Last Messiah is that, when I read it, for instance, the sentiocentrism of some kind or another is so apparent, and it's like this beautiful heartbreak, over the suffering of sentience. He's so clearly pondering and reacting to the suffering of sentient life. But in the eyes of a lot of other antinatalists, this is an extremely anthropocentric antinatalist work. And there's been a lot of debate over that. So finally, my question is, I would love to know any of your thoughts, really, on where you think Zapffe stood on the subject of sentience. If you have any thoughts at all on the sort of anthropocentric versus sentiocentric antinatal divide. But also, I really don't know to what extent he may have written. I know that obviously he wrote a lot about ecology and the environment, but I don't know to what extent he talked about our responsibility towards animals, whether he had any kind of, whether that bled over into his, dietary choices at all, or,
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that The Last Messiah, especially the beginning, the story of this hunter who goes out when he's out there by the watering hole and he's struck by this sudden new awareness of suffering. It does seem to be the suffering of all sentient beings. It seems to be connected with the animals he's there to hunt. So I think that, and I see that present in On the Tragic, sort of a sadness about the situation of sentient beings. It's present there in On the Tragic. But I would say that he does have basically a traditional distinction between humans and animals that I think he he seems to think factors into the nature of the tragedies that arise.
Yeah.
And that the big difference being, this is very traditional, but that in the human being, the tragic course components of the tragic course enter into conscious agency along their way. So there, I mean, roughly you could say there's choice involved in a way that only humans could choose. And
Yeah.
So if you translate that to animals, it starts to break down because you're missing the conscious agency that you see in human beings.
Okay.
So that's definitely. So I would say On the Tragic is a bit anthropocentric.
Okay. Yeah.
But at the same time, he does seem, intimately empathetic towards the suffering
Absolutely.
of non-humans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that's sentiocentric enough in my book. But I mean,
I
appreciate what you're saying.
Anything about his diet in his later writings about the environment. We might eventually, we get him in English translation, see more of what he had to say about that.
Yeah.
He may have been forming his views then.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a story On the Tragic about the cats on the island.
No.
This is a fantastic story. I think somebody might have translated a version of this in English online. I won't belabor the story because it's long, but it fits in with this. Basically, a ship. There were a bunch of cats on a ship, and the ship ran aground on an island, and the crew of the ship abandoned it, and maybe were rescued or something.
Okay.
And so you just have this grounded ship with cats on it, and so the cats all jump out and go, move to the island.
Right.
There's no edible food there's these beetles that live on the island, and they jump around, these jumping beetles, but they're not edible.
Okay.
But then on the beach, in the sand, there's these clams that are easy to open and are edible.
Mm-hmm.
And basically half or some of the cats move up to the higher ground and spend all their time trying to, jumping, leaping, and chasing these beetles like cats do. But they couldn't eat. They were inedible.
Yeah.
And then you have the other cats stayed down in the muddy shore and just dug in the sand and clay and gorged on these clams. And so Zapffe used this as an analogy of same time, these cats chasing these beetles are fulfilling their nature, living lives worthy of a cat, but it's going to mean their death.
Right.
And these other ones are undignified and stooping below.
But they're gaining their sustenance.
But they're staying alive.
Yeah.
And so that's another example he uses in conjunction with the Irish giant deer, I think.
That's fascinating. I have to think about both of those. All right. Well, I mean, that brings us. So thank you again for your thoughts on all of that. And again, there's so much to talk about when it comes to The Last Messiah. So I apologize for kind of cutting it off here, but let's go on to the meat and potatoes of
we talked a bit about it, but
it's definitely woven into where we've been already, but let's go on the Tragic. So before we get into specifics, I mean, today, as we've talked, this is far more than I ever knew about On the Tragic. I know precious little about what's in On the Tragic. In fact, I thought The Last Messiah was in On the Tragic, and several people have told me that. So yes, I mean, what is it? What does it include? And a little bit more about how you became its translator.
Yeah, so I'll start with how I became the translator. I already told you I was deeply interested in Schopenhauer, and Zapffe is sort of this natural successor to him. And I became aware of The Last Messiah, and then I became aware of On the Tragic. And so, I poked around to see, is that anybody got an English translation out there?
Yeah.
Sure enough, no, nobody does. There have been a couple attempts to do it.
Yeah.
And for a little while, I followed the developments. There's a few, discussion boards online, forums where people are talking about it. Yeah. And there's even an article in Philosophy Now where I think they were grad students, did an article or interview where they're heralding, we're going to translate On the Tragic.
Yeah.
And I thought that was way premature because they eventually failed and didn't translate it. So that we should probably contact Philosophy Now and let them know. Put a little addendum or
What do you want to
somewhere
bet
and
Tim
say,
already has? Yeah, or Andreas, but yeah, I mean there were quite a number of attempts.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
yeah.
I followed some of them for a little while to see where they stood, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll. So my original exposure to On the Tragic was I just wanted to read it,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
even though I had a weak at best reading knowledge of Norwegian and Danish, it would have taken it's not a fun reading experience when you're
I can't imagine. Oh yeah,
when you don't have a native command of it. So I just wanted to read it.
yeah,
And I waited a few months to see how these attempts were going. Not good at all. I think somebody ran the whole book through Google Translate and put it online, but it is
from what I understand. But
almost worthless. It's
Yeah.
almost worthless. And so eventually it became clear to me that nobody was going to get this translated anytime soon. And so I thought, well, I'll translate it myself so I can read it.
yeah,
And my initial thought was there's no way a publisher or the rights holder would ever allow my translation to be published because I'm not a native Norwegian. I didn't have a ton of confidence in
Yeah.
the quality of what I would produce,
yeah,
but I wanted to read it. And so I started translating it myself. And, after a while, I looked back at what I was producing and I thought, hey, this is actually pretty good. And with some more revising, I think this could have a really high quality.
yeah,
And yeah, so then I thought, oh, I'll give publishing a try. And I was surprised at the enthusiasm when I went to
that's so awesome.
the first publisher.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's how I became the translator. And then yeah, the other question was what is the book?
yeah.
What is it about?
But before you get, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
sure.
you. But like that, I just love that that's the story. Just because I mean, it started out. I always just in my head think, to become the translator of a work like this, they go and they find you. They
Yeah.
like they you're anointed the translator of a work such as this somehow.
Yeah,
You're
far from it.
you're picked from a
knew
short list of
Yeah.
only a few candidates. But I love that this started out as I want to read it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And
Yeah.
there have been attempts to translate it where, like the Philosophy Now article, where they, people announce to the world, we're going to translate it.
Yeah.
And I did the opposite. I didn't say a word. Nobody knew I was working on it
That's amazing.
ever until
Yeah.
I started to seek publication for it. And it took me 4 years to translate it,
Wow.
and I never said anything to anybody about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't. First of all, I didn't want the pressure. Even if I could get a publishing contract, I didn't want that pressure, hanging over me, especially since I didn't know if I would succeed. And
I think that contributed to the death of several of these attempts.
Yeah, I
If you want
think
to know
so
the
too.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I just quietly worked, and eventually my confidence grew when I saw what was being produced, and
Yeah.
I could see light at the end of the tunnel and all that. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you for sticking with it and for
Sure.
doing it. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I'm really interested in this having been his doctoral dissertation. That surprised me to no end.
Yeah.
I guess it shouldn't, because I mean, I have seen the documentaries that they have made about him,
Yeah.
with the wonderful footage of him, and he kind of talks about it a little. I guess I'd forgotten, but yeah, I know precious little about that history and the circumstances around this having been his dissertation. And so again, we talked a little bit about this, but I mean, I know there's some disagreement about who pushed him
Yeah.
towards whether it was Arnie Ness or this other professor that pushed
Yeah.
him
And we have a
through
quote
being his doctorate for his doctorate.
so the most recent edition of On the Tragic in Norwegian, I think, was in 1983.
Okay.
That's the one that's currently in print.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
And in that 1983 edition, a gentleman by the name of Frederick Pasha, who factored into Zapffel's life prominently in his university years, wrote was referenced in the foreword. He didn't write
Okay.
the foreword. The foreword was written by this Jan Braga Gundersen.
Okay.
And so, yeah, this is quote 20. I don't know if you still have that. I can look at mine. Yeah, so this is in the foreword. I took this foreword out of
Okay.
my edition because I wrote a translator's preface, and I have a forward from Dr. Benatar
Yeah.
and Thomas Lagani. So I took those out, this one out. But this Gunderson wrote on the tragic is Peter W. Zapffe's doctoral dissertation from 1941 is a result of an 11-year effort
Wow.
that Zapffe started after he quit his post as an attorney in Tromsø and resumed studies at the University of Oslo. That's that 11-year period I referenced earlier that suggests he wrote Last Messiah at the same time. He had previously earned a law degree. This time he took the study of literature. On the Tragic was planned as a master's thesis in this discipline.
Yeah.
Zapffe came in contact with Professor Frederick Pasch, who recommended that he submit the work for assessment for the PhD. So that's I don't know much beyond that. So
Yeah.
when he left law and decided to go back to university, it was to study literature.
Right.
I also have read, I'm not sure if this is the case, but I also read that when he wrote his thesis for his law degree, he did it in verse form.
Really?
I'd like to see what that was.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, I wonder.
And we got it through the committee.
Yes.
But so he went to study literature.
Yeah.
But the work he was producing for his master's thesis was so deeply philosophical that I think this person, Frederick Pasch was a professor there.
Okay.
He thanks him in his acknowledgments, and he encouraged him to submit it for the PhD in philosophy.
And I think it was, again, and I still wrote your friend. I think it was on that podcast that he was on that I got the idea that it was Arnie Ness who had pushed him in that direction. But from what I also understand, they had it may have been both of them, but also they had this major falling out. So maybe that's why this guy got credited with it and not Arnie Ness. I don't know. It's just I'm totally pulling that theory out of my butt, but I don't know.
So I don't actually know if he defended it as
that's
a
my next question.
Thesis in literature, and so he has a master's in literature and a PhD in philosophy. I don't actually know those details.
Right.
But I know it turned into his philosophy doctoral dissertation.
But it was all within the same university, right?
University of Oslo.
University of Oslo.
Yeah.
Okay. And we know that he did defend the dissertation.
PhD,
Do we know anything about that defense?
I don't know anything about it, no.
Okay. That'd be
Unfortunately.
really interesting to
Yeah.
because there would have
I'm
been
sure
a
we could
summary
find
of the
out.
defense,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then
I know who would know.
Yeah.
Jürgen Hova would know, and maybe Andreas would.
Yeah, I bet you Andreas would know too. I'll have to bug him about that.
Yeah.
Because that would really be interesting if there was any. So it was never I don't know why this is. I don't know why this is so fascinating to me. But so it was never defended. Well, he didn't fail the literature masters.
Yeah, I don't know if he defended it in literature for a master's also, or if he just switched
right
to philosophy. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, that's okay.
I don't have any sense that he failed his literature degree.
Okay. Yeah, but it would be interesting if
I'm
there's
not
any
sure.
anecdotes. I mean, just because of the I think one of the reasons why this is so fascinating to me is because there is sort of these latent antinatalist themes in the On the Tragic. I mean, years later, you have examples of Karima Kerma, who's a German antinatalist philosopher and historian, who was failed at his postdoc
because of
the antinatalism. So it's just interesting. This is an earlier example of somebody being able to sneak it in.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's interesting.
You wonder if there was any controversies or anything like that.
Because of
how it was perceived in those days.
Just the darkness of the.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure. That'd be interesting to find out.
Outside of having written this for his PhD defense, I mean, for his dissertation, do we know much about what inspired Zapffe to write this work? Like, what his process of I mean, we know it took 11 years, but what led him to do this? What inspired it?
I don't know a lot about this, but my understanding is that I mentioned before he had these philosophical yearnings early in life, and Jürgen Hova wrote a biography of Zapffe that I've actually started translating.
Oh, amazing! Okay,
if I can convince him to let us publish it. But the biography begins with Zapffe telling his parents that he doesn't want to work in law anymore.
Oh, wow! Okay.
Yeah, so he in this biography by Jürgen Hova, he has a lot of diary entries that Zapffe wrote.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
And so you can get a sense of what Zapffe was thinking at the time when he left law.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there was this discontentment with the profession, that he wanted to do something in literature. He poses to his parents, maybe I'll write for newspapers, maybe I'll do this. And his father, who I've learned was a kind of a cruel guy,
Yeah, from what I've heard. Yeah.
was furious. He said, we spent all the money we have to send you to become a lawyer, and
Yeah.
now you're telling us you don't want to do it, and you're gonna go write for a newspaper. So, but I just think he had always had these philosophical yearnings and thoughts, and it was an avid reader, and was, that when the discontentment with his legal profession
Yeah.
built, he started to think of literature and philosophy as an alternative. And so the thoughts that you see in On the Tragic are thoughts he was having throughout that period and before. I think he's always had this obsession with the bleakness of the human situation,
Yeah.
and what do we do about it?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that's what led him to work on the book.
I mean, that's really it. I'm really happy to hear that you're translating that biography too. I mean, you're basically going to eventually have the collected works.
Well, I don't know.
We'll see. I mean, but
that
it's
would take a long.
that would take a long time. But it sounds like you made quite a dent in that already. To be honest,
It's nice that if the On the Tragic is a success in the eyes of the publisher, then they'll give them more incentive to do more, which is nice.
yeah.
Whether
But
that's
it's just
me or somebody else. doesn't
right.
matter.
I know it's but just it's so exciting to just get so much more of a window into this
Yeah.
person, because
Sure.
really, for English speakers, has been just been so little.
I think the biography would do as well as On
Yeah.
the Tragic, because people want to know about it. Some people want to know more about his life than read a 570-page philosophical work.
I honestly, I mean, I have equal interest in both. I mean,
Sure.
I definitely want to read On the Tragic, but I'd love to know more about him as a human being. I mean, who he was as a man
Right.
is fascinating. There is absolutely a real mythic quality to the existence of this work. I mean, really is no exaggeration
Yeah.
to say that antinatalists have been, pining for an English translation of this for ages. But as I'm sure you know, there have been lots of attempts, and what little I know, there's been quite a lot of drama surrounding the previous attempts to get this work in English. Do you know anything about these prior attempts? Do you have any insight into why it took so long for On the Tragic to see a full English translation?
Yeah, I know a little bit about this, partly from Tim and Andreas, but
Yeah.
partly from some other stuff I know. I know there were at least 3 or 4. Somebody told me, it might have been Andreas, told me that there was an attempt to translate it in English while Zapffe was even still alive.
Oh, wow. I didn't know at all.
That failed. And then my understanding is the first attempts, I think, first of all, the rights to Zapfe's works are held by the Barrett and Peter Wessel Zapffe Foundation, which is managed by this group called Unifor, which is housed in the University of Oslo. They manage a bunch of different estates. And so they're sort of the gatekeepers for publishing anything. And I think maybe, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were a little surprised there was interest in publishing Zapffe. They're skeptical about the English interest in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were some personality clashes with people that approached them.
Yeah.
But I think it took the foundation time to realize the enthusiasm that there was to read Zapffe.
Yeah.
And there may have been some changes on the board members and
Sure.
But by the time I got to them,
Yeah.
they were fairly enthusiastic. Although when I had a failed attempt with a different publisher, it wasn't the foundation's fault, it was the publisher's fault.
Yeah.
So I had a friend, an acquaintance who I talked to about publishing, a guy named Professor Todd K. Shackelford. He's at Oakland University in the Detroit Metro.
Yeah.
Big Zapffe fan and a psychologist and the director of their psychology center there at Oakland University. Which is another audience for Zapffe. There's a psychological theory on the tragic too. And
wow. Okay.
He's tremendously interested. And he gave me, I won't say the name of the publisher, but he gave me a contact at a publisher. And initially they were enthusiastic about publishing it. And we started to work through the details. But once it came time to talk to the foundation, The foundation initially only wanted to grant us rights to publish the translation in the United States and Canada.
Okay.
Because I guess they were existing, not proposals, but people had contacted them with interest in publishing in English translation, and they were in England and Denmark.
Okay.
So I think the foundation was trying to, say these other people came to us first from England and Denmark.
Yeah.
So we're not going to allow you to publish it in the whole entire English-speaking world because of that. But then my publisher, I think in the negotiations, they didn't like that. They wanted worldwide rights.
Right. Thank goodness. Yeah.
And then that went back and forth for a while. And eventually the editor at that publisher stopped returning my emails.
Oh no. Okay.
And I pressed them, and then even the Zapffe Foundation pressed them, and they just were silent. And
Wow.
So I said, okay, well, we'll go somewhere else. And then I found Peter Lang fairly quickly. You hear these stories about writers who send their book to 100
Yeah.
publishers before they find one. I didn't think I had the stomach for that. But I didn't need the stomach for that because I didn't write this book. They were enthusiastic
Right.
about Zapffe, not about me. And so the first publisher I went to was
Wow.
enthusiastic,
That's amazing.
but then dropped the ball.
Well, yes. Okay. I thought you were talking about Peter Lang. Right.
And then I went to somebody who has a really small publishing house, but the foundation was not fully comfortable with the collection of books that they publish and the size.
Okay. Right.
And then then I did sort of a general search, and I only sent a proposal to 5 or 6 publishers, and Peter Lang showed incredible enthusiasm.
Wow.
The acquisitions editor there that I worked with, his name is Dr. Philip Dunshea,
Okay.
and he knew of Zapffe.
Okay. Amazing.
He had a friend in university who was from Norway and talked to him all the time about Zapffe.
Wow.
So he was aware of who Zapffe was and
Yeah.
his basic philosophy and interest in him. And so when he got word of my proposal, he jumped
He
on.
was all over it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then we went back to the foundation,
Yeah.
and I asked him up front, so are you wanting to grant rights just in the US and Canada or worldwide? And they came back and said, we think worldwide rights would be appropriate. So I don't know if that British and Danish proposal, like they maybe contacted him and they said, no, we abandoned that.
Okay. Maybe.
But suddenly they're interested in worldwide rights.
That's awesome.
And it was pretty seamless from there.
That's incredible.
We just had to do a little negotiating, and then they gave us the rights.
It's time has come.
Yeah.
That's amazing. The way it all worked out.
And they've showed interest, the foundation showed interest in continuing to publish with Peter Lang with these other.
I'm so happy to hear that. This is
potential
I'm not the only one who's going to be like elated
Yeah.
to hear all of this, just
Yeah.
because it's the time for Zapfe's work to become
Right.
more accessible is now. I mean, do you have any? I mean, this might be way too early to know all this or to even ask this, but I mean, do you think I have no window into? I mean, obviously, I have a window into how accessible his work is in English, but have his works been translated in other languages before this? And do you think that, with your version of On the Tragic and perhaps other things coming out, that will be, seeing his work in other languages other than English? Do you think that's?
I think there
something
are
that
some
will be-
attempts to publish On the Tragic in a couple of other languages.
Okay.
And I think some of his work may have been published in German
Okay.
in the past.
Yeah.
I think there's a sprinkling of translations in other languages out there.
I think I could be wrong. I probably shouldn't even say this, but I think there's a Spanish translation of.
I'm aware of an effort to publish it in Spanish.
Okay.
I don't think it's out yet.
Okay. Right. Well, I'll say no more about that one then. Am I correct in it that one of the reasons why On the Tragic is so notoriously hard to translate is because it's not just in Norwegian, it's also in parts of it are in Danish as well?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about this online, about the difficulty of translating it because of the language itself. It's
Okay.
not written in both Norwegian and Danish.
Okay.
It's written
I see.
in Norwegian, but it's written in a former Norwegian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different versions of Norwegian, and for much of history, Norway and Denmark shared the language.
Yeah.
I think Norway's independence is something like 1814, I think.
That sounds about
And
right.
they started to build, sort of their own culture independent
Identity.
of Denmark. And so the Danish changed, Norwegian changed.
Yeah.
They're mutually intelligible, but they are different. And so there's a lot of different versions of Norwegian. And there's this Riksmål version, and there's this Bokmål version, and so on.
Right.
So I asked Jürgen Hove about this, like precisely what version is this? And I don't think I might have sent you. No, I didn't. I have it on my phone if you don't mind me reading it real
Sure,
quick.
not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, so Jürgen Hove wrote. I had an email conversation with him about
Yeah.
the exact language. Here's how he characterized it, which is in the translator's preface in the book. He said it was written in the language that Zapffe learned in school in the Norwegian spelling norms that were established in 1907.
Oh, wow.
It would be characterized today as eccentrically conservative Riksmål and is very close to Danish.
Okay.
So that might be where you
That's probably
heard it
why.
written in Norwegian and
Yeah.
Danish. It's written so it would have been old-fashioned even when Zapffe published it.
Okay.
So he's intentionally writing in an old-fashioned
Why?
style. I don't know. He seemed to love to play with style. Like talked
Yeah.
about him writing his thesis for his law degree in verse form.
Yeah.
He just liked to play with the styles of language.
Do you think that was part of his humor?
Maybe. It does lend I think it has an elegance to it that
Yeah.
maybe is lost in, like we see happening in English all the time, right?
Right.
So yeah, a lot of people make a big deal about how difficult it is to translate because of this, version of Norwegian he wrote it in.
Okay.
I think that it would probably be more noticeable to a native Norwegian speaker than somebody translating it. The big difference is in the spelling of a lot of words.
I can
The
imagine.
spellings have changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was very quick that I just began to convert the spellings in my mind. I knew he was spelling a particular word this way, and I knew contemporary Norwegian spells it a different way, but I
Mhm.
knew what the sort of the conversion was.
Right. Right.
So that wasn't really that big of a problem. And then the old-fashioned style, most of my interest in philosophy is 18th, 19th century. So
Right.
it's old-fashioned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I didn't have a ton of problems with that. I'd say the biggest problems were, the length.
Yeah. So it's 570 pages,
Yeah,
right?
and the Norwegian version.
We haven't said that already.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I had to just come up with an incremental,
Yeah.
systematic plan. But it's just part of my nature. I've always loved seemingly insurmountable tasks
Yeah.
that, when
Me
done
too.
incrementally, can be accomplished.
Right. Right.
You have to have a passion
Well,
that pushes you through.
100%. That's filmmaking is like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a certain, what Zapffe would call an autotelic enjoyment of the process, which I had, which is one of the requirements for being able to translate it.
Yeah.
The length, and then of course with any language, idioms are always a problem. That's the
Oh, of
hardest thing to
course.
learn in any other
Yeah.
language. But I
Yeah.
had Rue Fremstedal and Jürgen Hove to help me with any of those. And to be honest with you, there are a couple passages in there that even those two native Norwegian Zapffe experts
Wow.
couldn't completely figure out.
Wow.
So we did the best we possibly could with them.
Were they technically your editors?
No,
Or
they
they're-
were just, I
okay.
would just shoot them an email. I
Okay.
between the two of them, I only asked them about maybe 8 or 10 passages.
Okay. Okay.
And they were, Zapffe would have a sentence where I just didn't know what he was talking about, or there
Yeah.
was some
Yeah.
reference to something that's in Norwegian folklore or something,
Okay.
and they helped me with those. But they had a very, very light touch, just short emails.
Okay.
They
Interesting.
would say, "This is what I think he means."
And then was the whole book, once translated, handed over to editors that looked at both versions and
Okay, so what happened is I finished it. I said, I can't do any better. This is the best I can,
Yeah.
I went through it maybe 4 or 5 times. And I translated one sentence at a time.
yeah.
and I would basically look at the sentence to see if I could get the gist of it.
Yeah.
If I couldn't completely get the gist of it, I would use dictionaries to help me. And then, but I would just do one sentence at a time, and then I'd highlight in red terms that I knew were basically right, but that I would probably want to tweak later.
Okay.
And, so this is my first run through. So I had thousands and thousands of red highlighted terms and phrases and things. Then I went back and worked on just those. And eventually, when I was satisfied with the sentences, then I worked on the flow between sentences.
Right.
And, eventually I was editing it without looking at the Norwegian translation, just for continuity and style.
Yeah.
And then, so with my publisher, with Peter Lang, their books, I don't know about all of them, but a lot of them are peer reviewed. So when you fill out a proposal, they want you to recommend potential reviewers.
Okay. Right.
And so I put Dr. David Benatar at the top of the list because I thought, in the world of people who know Zapffe, he's probably the most famous of those who work in academics.
Maybe. Yeah.
And has one of the highest reputations. I mean, he's published by Oxford.
Yeah.
So I put him at the list thinking, that won't happen. And then I put 3 or 4 others. And so they sent the book off to someone for review, and then eventually came back to me with the review. And the reviewer can remain blind, so you don't see who they are.
Yeah.
This reviewer said, no, I'm fine with them knowing. And so I get the review back, and look, it's Dr. David Benatar.
Wow.
So Benatar
that's incredible.
Was the official reviewer of the
no kidding
of the book, and told Peter Lang, yes, you need to publish this, and yes, this is a good translation. I mean, he's not an expert in Norwegian, but as far as his review of the contents.
Yeah.
So then Peter Lang had no problem, everything came together.
That's pretty extraordinary, Ryan.
Yeah. So, and then that prompted me to say, hey, I should probably ask them to write a foreword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While you're at it,
I've only sent the book to, so I wrote, Dr. Benatar, Thomas Legati, and the people who wrote endorsements on the back of the book.
Okay.
Todd K. Shackelford at Oakland University, Rua Fremstedal, Jürgen Hove. I sent all of them a PDF of the translation in case they wanted to review.
Right.
But they're the only ones in the world who've seen my translation.
Wow.
And Peter Lang.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's exceptional all around. Yeah. Very, very rigorous and with very high endorsements.
Yeah.
Extremely high endorsements. So amazing. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Karima Kerma, who we spoke a little bit about before, he's a German anti-natalist philosopher and historian. He asks, in discussions on the internet, Zapfe's voluminous book on the tragic is sometimes heralded as anti-natalism's yet unexploited holy grail. Upon closer inspection, however, the book contains but a few truly antinatalistic statements. Would you agree with that? Would you say that that's true, Ryan? Because based on our conversation today, it sounds like there's a lot more in there than people are giving it credit for.
The expression truly antinatalist passages. It's probably true that there are not a ton of whatever truly antinatalist passages means, but the way Zapffe wrote this book is a way that philosophy is hardly ever written anymore. Which we used to call them like system builders, people like Kant and Hegel, and these guys who write these huge books, and they might have a single topic they're trying to talk about, but they build a world around the topic, and you can't really talk about their conclusions without talking about the world they build around it.
Mm-hmm.
And antinatalism is not Zapfe's stated topic of research.
Right.
The concept of the term
barely
tragic,
existed. Yeah.
That's the topic of it. He wants to try to figure out, what exactly does the term tragic mean? Can we explain it in a way that accounts for the way it's used in everyday speech?
Right.
Can we formulate it in a way that allows us to identify a tragedy versus a non-tragedy? And can we use it also in the aesthetic world? Can we, say why this particular book or this play, this novel, this story is tragic and why this other one is not? That's the stated goal.
Right.
But along the way, he seems to come to the conclusion that the human species fits the description of the term tragic as he's formulated it.
Yeah.
And so I think that forms the basis for antinatalist claims that he does make, in as much as he makes them.
Yeah.
But that's the reason. I mean, if you think that it's unethical to reproduce, there must be a reason why you think that.
Right. Right.
And you could use Dr. Benatar's asymmetry argument as the reason why, but that's not the only reason that a person
Certainly
could have
not.
for why.
Right.
And I think he's building a view of the human situation that could easily be the foundation for antinatalist thought. So I wouldn't want to say, they're just these few passages, pull them out, forget the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would caution against divorcing those passages from the bigger picture that he's trying to build.
No, that sounds very like a very wise, like it being very wise to say that.
Yeah, because I know there's somebody online who has pulled some of those out and said, okay, this is all he said about.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think we're about to get to that. In spite of frequent ill-informed claims to the contrary, the aforementioned truly antinatalist statements from On the Tragic have already been made available in English by Dr. Akerma, a professional translator himself. Have you consulted his translations for your own work too?
No, I'm aware of the existence of this. It's a collection of passages.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm aware of its existence, but no, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't consult those.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you a link to those if you're at all interested in those. But yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of the sense that I've gotten, and also just based on what you've just said as a moment ago, is that like, yeah, you could maybe think of it in terms of the whole book is building a case.
Right.
Again, going back to his law.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
It's building a case for why the human condition is, or why procreation is a tragedy,
Right.
why bringing somebody into existence is a tragedy. It's
Exactly.
building a prescription for the diagnosis.
Yeah, it's like if you were to,
Or the way around. Yeah.
like, it's like if you were to say Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, he's trying to say that the world we perceive is partly shaped by our mental capacities. Okay, well, what are the passages where he says that, and then just throw the rest out? No, he builds an argument slowly. That's the way philosophy used to be done. It's rarely done that way anymore. Sometimes it is, but these great system builders, that's what I love in philosophy, is these big cases that take time and nuance to build.
Yeah.
And so if he's making a case for antinatalism at all, he's making it on a huge foundation that he spends a long time building.
And so what are, changing my wording from this question a little bit, I mean, what are the elements of that case? Like what, I mean, because again, aside from these passages, I know so little about what is in On the Tragic. So what are these? And you've hinted at them a little bit. There's like there's psychology, there's evolution, there's law, there's all kinds of things that build this case towards that end.
Yeah, well,
perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so in the very beginning of the book, he basically says, you got to know what my method is before, I start building this case. And he calls his method a biosophical method. So he wants to look at biology, evolutionary biology, but he wants to do it not just in a traditional, he wants to stretch science a bit, and he knows that this is going to make some scientists skeptical of his arguments, but he doesn't think you can access the answer to the question he has without stretching it a bit. So he proposes biosophical method, which is sort of, biology, evolutionary biology, but partly from the perspective of the lived human life.
Yeah.
So he's doing a lot of biology, and so he spends a lot of time talking about protoplasm of all things, which I know very little about, but now I know more from him.
Yeah.
Sort of this substance that is the building blocks of life forms, and he talks a lot about protoplasm's undifferentiated, so it's not anything in particular.
Okay.
But it becomes particular things, and so he plays a lot on this. The elements in living organisms that are undifferentiated between those that once they become differentiated, they're locked in.
Okay.
They have no room for change. Protoplasm has endless possibilities. Once it becomes differentiated in something like a tooth or a bone or whatever.
Mhm. Right.
Now its shape and its task and its function is locked in.
Right.
So he makes a lot of this. He thinks there's a lot of undifferentiated components in the human being that are sort of settled in animals.
Okay. I see.
Yeah, he quotes somebody who calls a human an ape born too early. He makes a lot of, which is interesting. He makes a lot of, he builds a lot on this idea that primitiveness, when you think about the evolutionary development,
Mhm.
you think that primitive and complex, or primitive and sophisticated has a chronological,
Yeah.
things are most primitive at the beginning of the
Right.
process and the most sophisticated at the end. He disagrees.
Yeah.
He thinks
Yeah.
that you can have something that emerges chronologically later that's more primitive than something that emerged chronologically earlier.
And that was a concept that was kind of picked up on in True Detective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the quote of humans are apes born too early. It's sort of
Yeah.
like an ape, or I don't know, a gorilla or a chimpanzee or whatever, is in some senses more sophisticated than the human being because it has less undifferentiated components. It's settled.
And that kind of goes back to the dog and the cat
Yeah,
stories, right?
he
Like
talks
it's
a lot
more,
about
yeah.
pets, and he says that he tries to understand why human beings love pets so much.
Mhm.
And he talks especially of cats, and he says that they have a tranquility and a contentment that comes from basically the evolutionary work being done, and they're perfectly in harmony with their being and their environment, and we sense that from them, and we appreciate it. We appreciate the finishedness of their
Yeah.
being. And then human beings, on the other hand, I don't want to go through the entire argument, but human beings have very little physical skills that would enable them to survive and prosper.
Mhm. Yeah,
So the
right.
lack of physical, a fight with a wild animal, the wild animal's going to win unless you have things like weapons
Right.
or ingenuity for traps or protection or building a structure or whatever. So whatever insufficiencies humans have because of the way they've evolved are compensated by mental capacities.
Yeah. We're like a perfect, well, not perfect, but we're
Yeah.
a very well-developed brain with like
Right.
this imperfection of a body attached. Yeah.
That can make up for all those
Yeah.
inadequacies.
Yeah.
But the problem is the nature of the mental capacities, things like imagination, are so unfettered and analogous to the protoplasm that's undifferentiated that they have a wild application beyond what they're needed.
Yeah.
So what you end up with is just like the giant deer with the huge antlers, the antlers gave it an advantage in nature. It could flip enemies over and so on. It also presented problems. It gets caught up in thickets.
Yeah.
It's too heavy, requires too much calcium. Same thing with the human mental capacities. They make up the difference in our physical inadequacies, but they present a host of problems because of their unfettered nature.
Yeah.
I can imagine anything. I can plan anything. I can put together just in my mind all sorts of things that I don't need to for my survival.
Mm-hmm.
And that presents problems that create.
Right.
So basically the human being is over-evolved.
Right.
Or in that respect is over-evolved. And just like the Irish giant deer, it's probably going to lead to our downfall.
Right. Okay.
Which we see in the political sphere and in war and tensions and things like that. Technology, nuclear technology and so on. But to get to all of that, he talks about this protoplasm and the biology of living organisms and abilities and needs. He goes through different human interest fields.
Okay.
The social interest field, the physical interest field, the metaphysical field of interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically builds a picture of human beings as wildly varying, but within these parameters. They have people who have incredible metaphysical interests and needs and abilities.
Yeah.
And then you have other people, they could care less.
Yeah.
They have no interest whatsoever in metaphysics. Then you have other people who have, social interests. They're a social butterfly. Their whole life revolves around.
Yeah.
Others don't want to talk to another human being ever.
Right.
So, but in all of this, you have the sort of the meeting of fields of interest, abilities, and what the need demands of those abilities. You have surpluses of ability in some cases. You have deficiencies of ability in other cases. This basically accounts for all the struggles that human beings face.
Yeah. Yeah.
They face struggles when they have too much ability, and the ability needs an outlet but can't find one. They struggle when they have a need for ability, but they don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
So this puts the human being in eventually, potentially, into a tragic situation.
Wow.
Yeah.
My mind is just kind of blown just because I've had so little window into what is in this thing, and it's like, wow. So he covers. Yeah, I guess I'm in very pleasant shock. Honestly,
and he does eventually give us. I was laughing the other day going through the proof because he finally gives us a definition of the tragic on like page 255.
That's funny.
And then spends another 300 pages working out the implications of it. But yeah, so he really wants to settle on a new definition of the tragic, and I won't talk too much about that. But and then talk about when it applies. He basically the tragic involves what he calls qualified catastrophes. So
Qualified catastrophes.
So not all catastrophes are tragic, but all tragedies are catastrophic.
Okay.
So some catastrophes qualify in his mind to be called tragic. Others don't. There has to be an element of greatness involved, and there has to be a link between the greatness and the downfall. And eventually he talks a lot about literary works. He has a section where he examines 3 literary works: Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound,
Okay.
Shakespeare's Hamlet, and the Book of Job.
Oh, okay.
To
Interesting.
say, are these actually tragic works, and why, and so on. But actually, his section on the Book of Job is one of my favorite sections in the whole book. He has sort of a very different take on the Book of Job. He thinks the Book of Job is sort of the crown jewel of indictments against an unjust world order. What he would call that.
I would agree with that.
Misplaced in the Bible. He thinks,
Really?
Yeah, he thinks that believers, Jewish and Christian believers, think the Book of Job is supporting their idea of pressing through suffering and just leaving in the hands of God, when in actuality, he thinks that Job discovers a flaw in God's nature, the world order, which is that it's fundamentally unjust.
Well, as somebody that's never had a religious background, that's similar to my own reading of Job a little bit. And interestingly, I mean, Job does make some highly antinatalist statements himself.
Yeah.
I don't know if Zapffe points to any of that.
He never uses the term antinatalism.
No, of course.
He definitely suggests this is in line with the other.
I don't think that word existed yet.
Recently.
Probably not. It seems to have existed a little bit in 1950 something.
Okay.
But it didn't really mean anything philosophical. It was more like, well, we don't really know exactly where it started.
Yeah, his take on the Book of Job is amazing to me, and I could see theological discussions of it too, because it's not that he basically argues that Job discovers that God is what he calls a cosmic caveman.
Yeah.
That he's fundamentally unjust and has no interest in anything other than power, and reason is not something that he wants to engage in.
Well, again, this makes me want to read this other work that you're translating so much more too now, like
the Jesus biography.
The Jesus biography.
Play,
the Jesus or God as a psychopath.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like he was he was making that determination even then.
Yeah, I love
We're
the
getting
phrase
to that.
cosmic caveman because
Yeah, I love that.
all when Job meets with God in the book of Job, eventually God appears
Yeah,
and Job wants to have a conversation about why is my suffering deserved?
right.
And God just basically says, "Who are you to ask me for justification?"
Yeah.
And he says that, starts talking about, look how powerful the crocodile is and the hippopotamus. He's just talking about basically all
His
he cared
nature.
about was power.
Right.
And Job was, well, what about, can you give me a reason? And he's always just met with the cosmic caveman thing. Power is all that matters. I'm powerful, you're weak, submit. And Job eventually realizes, oh, I'm not dealing with a reasonable being here. I'm dealing with someone that only cares about power. So then he submits, but he's not submitting it for any reason other than there's no way I could have a conversation with this person about.
There's no way to reason with a mad
right?
God.
Right.
I mean, but that's so, yeah. I mean, well, I don't want to take us too far afield, but like, in trying in everything you've told me about his exploration of like what is the true nature of like the dog or the human,
Yeah.
to find out that God is insane, just seems
Yeah. Or drunk at the wheel.
drunk at the wheel. Yeah, that there's no one sane driving the
Cosmic
bus.
caveman. Kind of primitive, dumb.
I mean, a lot of people have said that Zapffe became a little less pessimistic as he got older.
I can see that.
But this seems like he was pretty. There's no light at the end of the tunnel.
There's definitely some dark
tragic
passages, yeah. And he thinks that the whatever the world order means, whatever is causing the universe and the world to be set up the way it is fundamentally unjust. And not always, but it sometimes talks a lot about the environment. Sometimes usually it's just indifferent.
Yeah.
Environment doesn't care about you.
Right.
Sometimes it's sympathetic. So, you're thirsty, you need water, and you come across fresh.
You get lucky sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you need to eat, and you come across your fruit tree. But usually it's indifferent, but sometimes it's hostile.
Yeah.
And there's a version of hostility called satanic. Sometimes it's satanic.
Interesting.
Then you think about things like the tsunamis that happened in Asia several years ago.
Oh,
Just wipes out 300,000 people. Satanic is a good word to use for that.
Absolutely.
And so the situation of the human being is it exists in a usually indifferent, often hostile, sometimes sympathetic environment that's not fundamentally just. Suffering is often undeserved. Fortune is often undeserved.
Right.
Yeah.
That it's just, I mean,
and that's a good reason to be an antinatalist, maybe.
Absolutely. I certainly think so.
So I think, that's why I suggested don't divorce the passages from the.
Well, I think that's really, I mean, again, without having read it myself, I think you're instilling a real piece of wisdom about the way of looking at this work. That I think that there are a lot of people, myself included, just because, out of ignorance, that yes, we're excited about this, but we're writing it off because, this is just a collection of passages and then that's it. But no, I mean, he's making a, there's a lot leading up to those passages being made or those statements being made. I mean, so, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I've never been more excited to read this thing.
Oh, good.
So, I mean,
and then he spends quite a bit of time then talking about the concept of the tragic in art, in theater, drama, literature.
Yeah.
And, Aristotle gave us the first sort of literary critical theory of tragedy. And so he looks back at that, builds on it. I love his section on Hamlet. He loves Shakespeare's Hamlet. He thinks it's sort of the exemplary tragedy. Yeah.
Well, it seems like we're so fortunate that he had all these different backgrounds, right? Like, his assessment of all of these things is coming from law, coming from literature, coming from philosophy, and it's like,
and even mountain climbing.
That's a very mature.
The image of mountain climbing figures
that's
frequently in the book too.
Yeah. He was already doing that
Yeah.
a lot by this point.
Yeah.
Sure.
There's a lot of imagery from mountain climbing in there.
Yeah. That is a whole area. I know that there's whole
I don't know much about
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's, I don't know her name. She was also on the Hermeneutics podcast. I mean, her work is just all about,
Oh, that's cool.
the impact of his mountain climbing. Yeah, it's not something I know that much about. So, I mean, again, we've talked a little bit about this already, but the $1 billion question, if there's anything else that you would like to add to this, is, I mean, what was it like translating this monster? I mean, so it took you 4 years. You've talked a little bit about the process. You magically became this Norwegian, expert, basically. Like, I mean, yeah.
Well,
But-
I think like most things in life, people have a lot of misconceptions about translation.
Yeah.
I think most people would assume that if you can read 2 different languages, then I hand you something in one of them and you put it into the other.
Right.
But there's a host of other things that have to be in place.
Yeah.
You need certain temperamental features. You have to be an incredibly patient person.
Yeah.
You have to not mind or even love tedium and incremental work.
Yeah.
You have to be interested in the topic of whatever it is you're translating. Otherwise, you won't have the sort of the fuel to push you through all the work.
Yeah.
So I had a deep interest in the book. You have to have time. I think
For sure.
if you had a family with children, it might be impossible to get through the translation. You just wouldn't have the time to do it and the focus. Your career has to be such that it affords you the time. I had been in the classroom a lot, but I had started to teach more online. I started translating before the COVID lockdown,
Okay. Yeah.
maybe a year and a half before.
Okay.
But I had sort of carved space in my life.
Yeah.
I don't have any children. I have a partner, but she was busy too. And so I did have the time and I basically had the patience. The weakest part was my Norwegian knowledge, which
Yeah. You had all the other elements in place. Right?
regardless of what your situation, you're going to have some weak areas that you have to
Yeah.
build. But it was slow
Yeah.
and painful at times. But I really did feel a bit like an archaeologist with, their little brushes.
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to find here? I couldn't wait to see what the next sentence
Yeah.
said. I mean, my ability to read Norwegian is really slow, so it's not like I can just fly through the book to see what it says.
Sure. Of course.
I have to sort of mine what
Take
it
it inch
says
by
out.
inch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was, I think here in Chicago when I started, but the bulk of the translation I did in Toronto, the 39th floor of a high-rise apartment in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
And I would lock myself in the office every day, 7 days a week for about, I think for 4 hours, 10 to 2 or something like that.
Oh my
I wouldn't
goodness.
even go out to go to the restroom or anything. And I would just intensely work for 4 hours every day, 7 days a week for many, many months.
Yeah.
And that got me through a bunch of it. And yeah, I just kept plugging along. It took me 4 years to translate it. And then we had publication problems. That problem with the first publisher
Oh, that's a bit heartbreaking.
added a year.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I can only
We would have
imagine.
had this already a year ago.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of waiting,
Right.
and then I got to start on other projects.
Okay.
But yeah, it was tedious, but enjoyable in an archaeological sense.
Yeah, I love that sense of archaeology about this whole project, and I'm just so happy you saw it through. But yeah, I mean, the determination that it must have taken.
Yeah, I guess I just possessed that
That kind of drive.
just by
Yeah.
accident.
Well, again, the entire Antinat. Please, in the comments, tell Ryan how appreciative we are. Really, truly, thank you, Ryan.
Sure.
Does Zapffe speak about the subject of ending one's life within On the Tragic? I mean, again, I think suicide may or may not be sort of hinted at, or a sense of promortalism may sort of be hinted at in The Last Messiah. But I've sort of heard conflicting things about his ideas regarding suicide, like that he wasn't necessarily in favor of it, but he thought that like things like the right to die should not be fought against.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
he does talk about suicide at times on the tragic. One of the main ways he talks about it is he spends a lot of time trying to distinguish between the heroic and the tragic.
Okay,
I
sure.
think some of the things people call tragic actually are not, they're heroic.
Yeah.
And so I think he does make some claims about heroic suicides.
Okay.
Seems fine with those. Almost, that they're praiseworthy.
Is that the same as like rational suicide?
I don't know. I mean, it's when you have competing interests
Okay.
and preserving your life being one of them, and you're willing to cut off this interest for the sake of this other interest that is more important. But this one seems to be more loom larger in the sensory field.
Okay.
So I don't know, like some thought experiment scenario where you have to kill yourself to save your family or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like you're sacrificing one interest for another interest that you believe in more strongly.
Like jumping on the grenade to save
Yeah.
save the town or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I see.
Or kamikaze pilots or something
Yeah.
like that. So he does talk quite a bit about that kind of stuff. As far as approaching your response to the cosmic situation of the human being suicide, I don't detect he's particularly in favor of that.
Okay.
One place when he talks about real solutions and pseudo solutions, he calls that suicide a pseudo solution.
Okay. Interesting.
And then he immediately says after that, closer to a real solution is a cessation of reproduction. So he talks about suicide and antinatalism in the same breath.
Uh-huh.
And he says basically antinatalism is closer to a real solution. He didn't say it's a real solution. He might still be classifying it as a pseudo solution, but it's closer to a real solution. Maybe he thinks it can be developed into a real solution.
Okay.
But he presents suicide as a pseudo solution to a problem. It seems to be in keeping with Schopenhauer's view.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer's father died mysteriously
Yeah.
when he was young, and most people think it was suicide.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
fair.
his book, The World is Will and Representation, he talks quite about suicide.
Yeah.
And his take on it is that it doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do, which is to bring the denial of the will. It is an act of will, so it doesn't actually bring about the denial of will.
Okay.
Zapffe seems to be echoing something like that, where
I see.
suicide doesn't accomplish in these scenarios where it's a response to the human situation.
Right.
It doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do.
Okay.
But in heroic situations, it very well could.
Yeah.
And you might be able to make some arguments in the right to die cases. Like your less expenses will be expended on your care if you die, which will benefit your family and
I
things
see.
like that. Yeah. You
So
can
that-
make a heroic case, maybe.
I see. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Fascinating. From what I understand, the book will include some statements by two other titans of antinatalism, both David Benatar and Thomas Ligotti. You've mentioned that previously. Congratulations. Is there something you can tell us about the statements made by those two in this book?
Yeah, sure. So once Dr. Benatar reviewed the book and gave it a positive review for Peter Lang, I didn't know Dr. Benatar, but I emailed him, and he was said he was honored to write a foreword and was excited about
That's so awesome.
He doesn't refer to Zapffe a lot, or if at all in his writing, not much.
A little.
He is interested in Zapffe, so he was excited about the translation and was glad to write it. And Thomas Ligotti, I didn't know either, and I somehow got his email from somebody at a small publishing acquaintance I have, and he was excited about it. Well, I come to find out later he'd been actually working towards getting a translation done.
Oh, really?
Before, yeah.
Yeah.
He was involved in earlier efforts that failed.
I think I've heard that. He's a huge
Yeah.
Zapffe fan. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was glad to write he was originally just supposed to write an endorsement for the back of the book, but what he sent me was too big,
Okay.
too long.
Somehow that doesn't surprise me, just given how much he loves Zapffe.
So I asked the publisher, "Can we have 2 forwards?" And he said, "Yeah, that's fine." So,
Nice.
they're not particularly long. Dr. Benatar is about 500 words, and
Okay. Yeah.
Thomas Ligotti is about half of that, 250. And they basically are situating the importance of Zapffe in the history of philosophy and different important thought, including antinatalism, some of it. So yeah, sort of situating it and showing appreciation that it now exists in English.
Amazing. Okay. That's really wonderful that they've given their endorsements.
Yeah, I was very grateful.
Yeah. Do you think that and you mentioned that you haven't read Conspiracy Against the
I haven't
Human
read
Race,
it,
right?
but not closely.
Okay.
Yeah,
But I mean, Zapffe is a really big part of that book.
right.
Do you think that
It's like his coming out party.
sort of?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think he did a lot to reveal Zapffe to the world.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
do you think what do you think about Ligotti's contribution to the world?
It's
Zapffe?
huge. It's
Yeah,
huge.
I agree.
And I mean, you could maybe put it all in his hands.
I kind of, yeah,
Without any other contribution, his might have been enough.
yeah,
I think Ligotti's book is probably a bit darker
oh yeah,
than On the Tragic,
I would imagine.
but it's hugely influential in introducing English speakers to Zapffe, and it's found its way in film and television, art, all kinds. Yeah, it's huge. It can't be underestimated.
Yeah,
And yeah,
because it was
Huge.
because of Conspiracy Against the Human Race that it ended up, in the hands of those that I can't remember the name of the author, but those that wrote True Detective.
Yeah, which I rewatched that season recently, and that the conversation between Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey in the car, which is the most Zapfian part of the whole thing, where he asked him what his take on the world was. He said, "Well, I call myself a philosophical pessimist." I find it incredibly funny. I laugh out loud with a sort of a dark humor, gallows humor or whatever, but
well, it's a little on the
that's-
nose to those of us that have been immersed in this for a
I
while.
think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
But it is very, very dark, very Zapfian. Maybe it might have out-Zapfed Zapffe too. It's very Ligottian.
It's very Ligottian. I mean,
And the writer admitted later that he almost lifted those from Ligotti.
I think he definitely did those from Ligotti and didn't pay any dividends
Yeah.
for it at all. I mean, which is
I
a whole
think
other
Ligotti's
subject.
Fine with it, I think.
Probably
understanding
I mean, I think, I don't want to speak for Ligotti, especially on those subjects,
Right.
but I mean, I do think there's a major part of Ligotti who's just happy that the work is being appreciated
Right.
and
Me too.
the thoughts are
But
out
I
there.
think that really brought awareness of Ligotti and Zapffe into the general public.
Yeah.
Like people listen to Matthew McConaughey and say, "Hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I think I believe that too."
What do you think Zapffe would have thought about contemporary antinatalism? I mean, I know, it's still a world that you're new to.
Right.
And we talked a little bit about what he would have thought about the more like the activist side of it, but I don't know. Just any thoughts you might have. What do you think he would have thought about Benatar's work or Ligotti even?
Yeah. It's hard to say, obviously, but I don't know. Nowadays, we have a lot more niche philosophy.
Yeah.
Where you can have a person whose whole entire world revolves just around antinatalism.
Yeah. Hey, hi. Yeah.
I think that would be very foreign to some.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that there wasn't so much niche thought like that. The schools of thought were much larger.
Yeah.
So he's wrestling with philosophical pessimism versus some sort of opposing optimism. I know he didn't identify himself as a philosophical pessimist. Later he said, "I'm a nihilist, not a philosophical pessimist."
Yeah.
And he does seem to criticize Schopenhauer and On the Tragic for maybe the pessimistic conclusions. But usually when you hear a person reject pessimism, it's not in favor of nihilism.
Right, right.
It's in favor, that's almost worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think he thinks we're living in an amoral universe.
Yeah.
And that's why he's nihilistic. But yeah, so I think the niche component of antinatalism would be foreign to him once he became I don't know, it's hard to speak for a person.
Of course.
But
Yeah.
I think he would he would probably enjoy the arguments and the debates and the objections, and he raised some of his own, like I said,
Yeah.
to his own positions. So I think he would fully enjoy the dialogue.
Yeah.
For sure. As far as that, I don't know. It's hard to say. The activism, I think he could go either way. I mean, it's hard to know for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't see him being completely opposed to it. It might take him some while to figure out what the heck it is in the first place. As a niche,
We're all
the world in general.
We're all at that same point though with antinatalist activism. What the hell is it? What the hell are we trying to do?
Yeah.
What chances do we have? Like, what does it look like?
So he's like, wait, what's the plan again?
I mean, antinatalists themselves extraordinarily divided
Right.
on if it should be a form of activism
Sure.
or not. So, it's very contentious. But I mean, I'd love to know. We've spoken about this on and off, but Zapffe has had this huge impact now. He's got
Whether
this
he
huge
likes it or
fan
not.
base, whether he likes it or not, whether he would have been proud of it or not. I mean, that's,
I'm sure he'd be proud of it.
yeah, I would hope so. But I'm curious to know your thoughts on his legacy, the works that he's inspired, the impact he's had, particularly now that the dawn of antinatalism is a growing presence in the world,
Mhm.
and again has had this big impact on the arts, specifically in the form of True Detective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm asking here, but I wonder if you have any
legacy.
sort of vision on how that will develop further,
Yeah, well, of course, I'm hopeful that the publication of this translation will cause a proliferation in interest in Zapffe.
I hope so, too.
And, the
Yeah.
interest in Zapffe among antinatalists is just a small
Yeah,
group of people who could potentially be interested in Zapffe.
100%.
The range of fields is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
the dramaturgists, literary critics, biologists, psychologists, sociologists, and there's political elements, theologians,
Yeah.
and there's elements of the book that speak to all these different disciplines, and so I'm hopeful that we'll see a growing interest in Zapffe, which will include a growing. I'm positive that there will be doctoral dissertations written
Without
on
question.
it. There will be
Yeah.
articles, there'll be books attempting to interpret it. I thought originally my plan was nobody will ever publish my translation, so I'll just read the book and then write a book, a commentary.
Really? That was your plan?
A commentary, yeah.
I love
Nobody's going to publish my.
I love it.
So there'll be commentaries on it. There'll be arguments about it. There'll
Yeah,
be
without
podcasts.
question.
There'll be songs. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it'll grow, and I'm hopeful that it'll grow in a good direction and be fruitful.
And I'm going to be here for every bit of it. Future
Not
podcast
if
guests.
not if your plan works.
Well, I don't think that plan was going to work in my lifetime. So many more episodes of Exploring Antinatalism.
Oh yeah,
to come, for
you'll
sure.
be here, just not your children.
No. They will. Yeah. I will. What is his quote again? I will. I will leave the earth
In silence.
in silence. Yeah, forever after. So.
You'll leave them back there in the nothingness they come from,
Exactly.
and they return to Schopenhauer again.
Right. So before we move on, just sort of our final thoughts. I mean, this has really been like an incredible interview. We've covered so much
Yeah,
ground.
thanks so
And
much. Been
yeah,
fun.
thank you. I mean, is there anything else about On the Tragic that like maybe we haven't touched on that you'd like to say?
Oh wow.
I mean, it's hard to summarize 570 pages
Sure.
and 4 years of work, into a
Yeah.
couple of questions on a podcast. So I'm sure there's a lot we've missed.
It's a very, very dense book. I mean,
Yeah.
parts of it are quite readable there's a lot of lay interest in Zapffe.
Yeah.
People who aren't necessarily used to reading dense philosophical works.
Yeah.
Some of it will be a struggle to get through, especially the last chapter where it's basically a review of his contemporary literature on the tragic.
Yeah.
It's quite a slog getting through it, but
Okay.
yeah, it's quite readable in other sections. And yeah, I created an index which didn't exist before that
Oh, wow.
hopefully will
Okay.
help people. And for some people, it might end up being more of a reference. Like, I wonder what Zapffe said about Hamlet, and they can look it
Yeah.
up.
Well, that's very useful. Thank you.
And then in the academic world, I think it's a lot like a book like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, where
Yeah.
I'm hoping, and I believe it belongs in the sort of the philosophical canon and will be debated by academics. And yeah, who knows? Maybe like Nietzsche, one day there'll be a class devoted entirely to Zapffe.
Oh, I
I
wouldn't.
could see a class being devoted to antinatalism. Maybe there's already been.
There have been little here and there, but not much.
Yeah.
Not much at all. But I definitely think, I can only
Yeah.
hope that
I could see it
that will happen for sure. But I mean, Zapffe definitely deserves it all his own, even devoid of that subject entirely. I
Mhm.
mean, it's definitely something far
It'd
deserved.
be a great class where you just talked about the book.
I just think
I've
that
had
this is
classes
going
like that with other philosophers.
Yeah, just on one book,
Yeah.
entire semester. I absolutely. Well, it's certainly long enough and
Yeah.
dense enough. And I just want to say that, even from this interview, everything you've told me, I mean, it totally changes my mind about the kind of thinker that I assumed that he was. I think in many ways. I mean, I've been told so many times that he wasn't a very, like, you'd never really know what he meant by something, or he wasn't a very what's the word I'm looking for? Like, technical thinker. He wasn't a very, like, nothing he said was very exacting. It was a little bit more like Chiron, where it's like
quite technical.
he said a lot of things, but they were more like aphorisms. Not that he wrote in aphorisms, but that his philosophy was almost more aphoristic, because he never really sort of knew where he was headed or going. And I don't think that's the case at all now.
No, in
Yeah.
fact, I think it's
actually the opposite.
It's his strongest attempt to formulate his thoughts about the human condition in as scientific a way as he possibly can. So
Yeah.
it's quite precise.
Yeah.
And he shuns abstraction that's meaningless, and
Yeah, that's absolutely.
criticizes it.
Well, I absolutely cannot wait to read it. Ryan, you have accomplished the seemingly impossible and finished this massive work that, and we really are truly also appreciative. Thank you so much. Perhaps it's too early yet to think about the future. You have mentioned, though, several other works that you're working on, some of them Zapffe related, some of them not. But I mean, may I ask, what is next for you? What's the next big thing? What are you working on?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on translating some of Zapfe's shorter works. At the moment, I'm translating a short essay that he wrote. It was published in a Tromsø newspaper in 1933. It's called in English, Experience Supply and Experience Demand.
Okay.
And it's very prescient. 1933, he's talking about the proliferation of experience opportunities and input.
Yeah.
As opposed to the needs that human beings have for experience.
Okay, interesting.
And it sounds a lot like what a contemporary social critic might say about there's too much experience. There's a surplus of experience, and the need of human beings is overwhelmed by this just barrage of experience. And in the very last line in the book, he says something, concludes that we didn't actually need the 20th century. It's just about the proliferation of input by market forces and things. So that sounds great for the contemporary reader. So that's in a collection of shorter works that I'm working on, and we already basically have a tentative agreement between Peter Lang and the Zapffe Foundation to put that out. So I expect that to happen. I don't know how long it'll take. I'd estimate about a year.
Okay.
And then
well, the tragic will keep us busy.
Yeah.
And before that,
And I mentioned the Jesus play, the Lost Son or the Prodigal Son. I'm about 2/3 of the way through first run at it, but we'll see with that one if there's interest in getting it out there in English.
Voice your interest.
Yeah.
Down below, comments.
Peter, of course, the publisher needs to see that there's actually
of course
interest. And then I also have a couple side projects of translation. There's a Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer, I'll try to be brief with this, but Schopenhauer lived most of his life in Frankfurt in Germany in an apartment building. And the apartment building owner also lived in the building, and he had children. And these children used to interact with Schopenhauer.
Oh, okay.
Typically, Schopenhauer is seen as this grumpy, angry guy. He famously pushed a woman down the stairs, had to pay her for the rest of her life. And but one of these children later wrote a short book about her experiences with Schopenhauer, and she presents a completely different picture of him.
Wow.
About how playful he was and the different things that her and her sibling, I can't remember if there's one or two siblings, they would visit Schopenhauer and all these different experiences she had. I'm still trying to pin down the fullest version of it and verify the authenticity of it.
Okay.
And all that.
Right.
But I do have a project to
oh my God, that'd
try
be
to translate
amazing work, because there's nobody has that sense except for those paintings of him with his dogs, which offer such a different idea of of the kind of man he was.
But I suspect, like Kant, the picture of Kant is that he was this sort of obsessively anal retentive guy who every day he would pass by the same house at the same time. People would set their watches to him.
Right.
But there have been biographies of him since. It turns out that he had a close English wealthy merchant friend who spent a lot of times in Königsberg, where he lived. And it was actually that guy who was the one who was inviting Kant to his house for dinner.
Okay.
And he was the one who was so punctual.
Right.
So Kant had to get there at the right time. So he's passing that house every day, not because of his own requirements, but because of the requirements.
And his whole personality has been painted like that because that's so funny.
So I suspect some things like that have happened with Schopenhauer.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to get this woman's account of her interactions with him when she was a child.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. I would,
We'll see.
I hope
what happens.
I wish you much success on that endeavor.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Ryan, the new translation of On the Tragic, the due date or the release date has changed. I mean, we thought it was February 28th. It's now, we think.
Currently, it's March 30th, but that is tentative. So we'll see.
Okay, excellent. And that will be through Peter Lang.
Reviewing the proof now, so we're right almost to the finish line.
Amazing. So exciting. Some people in the world that I've spoken to, like Tim, have been able to make a pre-order already. I've been in the process of trying to make the pre-order. It doesn't seem like it's available yet, like for Americans to make pre-orders. Let me know if any Americans yet have made a successful attempt to pre-order it. However, I'm going to be continuously updating the newest information in the description. So links and finalized release dates or pre-order dates will be in the description. So please check back if it's not there already.
Yeah, and if I get any updates, I'll let you know.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Well, okay, Brian, thank you so much for your incredible book. Congratulations to you. It's an incredible achievement to have made this translation. I really cannot wait to read On the Tragic. It's sort of a dream come true to finally have this work available to American audiences. And, it really does sort of feel like this incredible chance to finally get to know this thinker who's been a really in the background integral part of my life for the last 14 years of my antinatalism. And so I really think you're giving a remarkable gift to the antinatalist community, and not just the antinatalist community, all of the people that will be interested in this work. And I think it's going to have tremendous impact. So it's been lovely having you join me here today at home, the first in-person edition of Exploring Antinatalism. This has been a lovely chat, and thank you so much for being my guest today on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Hey everybody, it's Amanda. Are you looking for an excellent way of making academic antinatalist works more available across the globe? I know I am. And so I'm delighted to announce that the wonderful and award-winning Polish publishing house
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego,
which over the last 2 years has produced some exceptionally beautiful Polish editions of both original works like
Antinatalism
by
Mikołaj Starzyński,
as well as classic academic antinatalist works like David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, has now opened an online shop featuring the magnificent antinatalist ouroboros designed by
Michał Dziadkowiec.
The logo is fully customizable and available on a wide variety of products. Proceeds from all sales at the shop go directly towards the translation, production, and publication of more Polish editions by
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
What a perfect way for the antinatalist community to help assist an amazing company doing such important work, making more antinatalist academic works more widely available. Link below!
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/lifesuckspublishing. Music by Matti Hairi. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description, and make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song. If you must give them a gift, then give them the gift of non-existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below. All the best, and bye for now.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill, it's worse than nil. So draw to the right conclusion, let them be still.